Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley. Tonight, I will guide you into a world of darkness, hoping to help you relax and unwind. Perhaps some of you will even drift into a haunting yet soothing sleep. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And now, we begin. My name is Marcus, and I'm a construction worker. For years, I have been involved in projects on all types of terrain, from building construction in the city to rural projects on land forgotten by time. My job consists, among other things, of excavating, shaping the terrain, creating strong foundations, and in many cases, preparing the foundations for future buildings. I don't usually worry about rumors or superstitions that sometimes circulate around certain terrains. People tend to invent stories when they don't understand what happens in a place, or when they feel uncomfortable with something. But what happened that year changed my perspective forever. The story began when I was assigned to a project on a remote piece of land south of Portland, Oregon, on the outskirts. The terrain was surrounded by a small forest, and although it didn't seem like anything out of the ordinary, there was something peculiar in the atmosphere. The people who lived in the surrounding areas, especially the elderly, spoke of it with a certain fear, whispering about a bad omen that weighed over that place. They said the land was cursed, that those who tried to build on it always ended up failing, or worse still, disappearing without a trace. Of course, at first I didn't pay much attention to it. I just thought they were stories to scare the younger ones. What surprised me most was the price of the land. It was incredibly cheap considering the location, which, if it were any other terrain, would have had much more value. So without hesitation, the project moved forward, and we began excavations to prepare the foundations. The first day there was nothing out of the ordinary. The sun was shining, and the atmosphere was calm. The machinery began to work, and I was in charge of supervising the progress. However, something strange occurred when the excavator began to remove the deeper earth. At first, it was just a small strip of earth that seemed more compact than the rest. But when the operator dug deeper, we began to hear a strange sound. It was like a dull blow, something heavy hitting against metal. I thought there might be some stone or thick root, but when we stopped the excavator, something else appeared. A rusty metal object came to light. It was a small box covered by layers of mud and earth, almost as if it had been there for centuries. Curiosity invaded us, and as soon as we managed to extract it, we realized it wasn't just a common box. It was a very old type of box covered with strange symbols, almost indecipherable. It wasn't something you saw every day, and we all stood looking at that relic with an inexplicable feeling of discomfort. I decided we would leave it there for a moment so as not to interrupt the work. But as we continued excavating, stranger things began to appear. First, a small statue of a human figure, broken and deformed, as if it had been thrown there with force. Then fragments of ceramics with strange shapes, something I had never seen before. And worst of all, human bones. Human remains scattered among the earth. They weren't recent bones. They seemed to be hundreds, maybe thousands of years old. At first I thought they might be from some animal, but when I saw the partially intact skulls and fragments of clothing buried alongside them, I realized they weren't. They were human remains. I couldn't explain it. The supervisor, upon seeing what we had found, decided it was better to stop excavating there. However, before leaving, He asked me to take note of everything we had found and to call the police if necessary to investigate the remains. But for some reason, I didn't do it. Something inside me told me it was better not to involve the authorities in this. The atmosphere at the place began to become more tense, as if something were watching us. That night when I arrived home, I tried to leave all that behind, thinking that what we had found was nothing more than an unsolved mystery. But I couldn't. I couldn't help but remember those human remains, the strange box, the symbols, and the sensation that something in the air was wrong. When I lay down, my mind wouldn't stop spinning. The images of the remains and the feeling of discomfort pursued me. That same night, I had my first nightmare. I found myself again on the terrain, standing in front of the excavator, watching the operator remove the earth. But this time, something was different. The earth began to move by itself, and the remains we had found began to rise from the ground, as if they were attracted by an invisible force. The skulls turned toward me with empty sockets, observing me fixedly. Suddenly, the earth opened, and a bony hand emerged from the ground, extending toward me, inviting me to enter. I tried to scream but couldn't emit any sound. I woke up sweating, with my heart racing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something was watching me. Something was waiting for me to return to the terrain. The next day, I headed back to the construction site with my head full of those images. When I arrived, I saw that the area where we had excavated was already fenced off, and a team of archaeologists had arrived to investigate the remains. The supervisor explained to me that the police had decided to call experts to examine everything we had found. For a moment, I felt relieved, as if the problem were out of my hands. But then one of the archaeologists called me to accompany him to the place where we had found the remains. When I arrived, I saw something that froze my blood. The box we had found the previous night was no longer in the same place. It was open, and inside there was one more object, a polished black stone with a crack in the center. The archaeologists told me they had no idea what it was, but that it wasn't an object from the region, that it didn't correspond to any type of local culture. They offered to take it away for analysis, but before they could do so, the supervisor ordered them to leave it there. From that moment on, the nightmares intensified. Each night was more vivid, more terrifying. In one of them, I found myself again on the terrain, but this time I wasn't alone. Dozens of faceless figures rose from the earth, slowly emerging toward the surface. They looked at me without eyes, with an imposing presence. Their bodies were made of earth and bones, and although I couldn't see their faces, I felt they were watching me with an anger I couldn't understand. I woke up once more soaked in sweat, with the sensation that something was lurking, waiting for something deep in the earth, something that shouldn't have been awakened. The nightmares continued, and with them the sensation that something was wrong with the terrain. I began to hear strange noises while working. At first, it was just the sound of the excavator or machinery moving, but then the whispers began. Voices I couldn't identify, but that came from beneath the earth. The words were incoherent, but they could be heard clearly in the wind. My boss noticed I was increasingly distracted and asked me if something was wrong. I didn't know what to tell him. I decided I should leave the job, that I should get away from there. But something stopped me. Something strange and dark inside me kept me tied to that place. Finally, one morning, After a particularly terrifying day when the voices intensified, I decided I couldn't continue. I approached the excavator, and with trembling hands, we shut everything down. I looked one last time at the terrain, the disturbed earth, and I knew that something deep in that earth didn't want to be found. It didn't want to be disturbed. I never returned to that place, although sometimes when I close my eyes, I still hear those voices, those distant whispers. And I know that in some deep corner of the world, something is still waiting for me to return. Something that should not be unearthed. Something that watches from the bottom of the earth. I hope you enjoyed the first story. If you did, don't forget to leave a like. But if I didn't do my job well, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let's continue. I've been driving special cargo for over a decade now, specializing in transporting heavy equipment for the marine industry across the Pacific Northwest. My life consists of endless miles of asphalt, strategic maintenance stops, and long hours alone on the highway. I know every curve of these Oregon mountain roads like the back of my hand. The Cascade Range always accompanies me during my routes, standing like silent guardians over the landscape. Even though this was a route I traveled regularly, that particular dawn brought something different in the air. The atmosphere felt heavy, loaded, as if the environment itself knew something unusual was about to happen. I decided to make a stop in a small town whose name I could never remember. The excess caffeine was making me dizzy, and nature's call couldn't wait any longer. Having missed the reference point for the next exit sign, I resolved to park right there on the shoulder. I turned off the engine, opened the door, and stepped down to stretch my body. My back protested after hours of driving. I walked toward the vegetation that bordered the highway to relieve myself. The Douglas firs swayed gently in the night breeze, and the darkness was so dense it seemed to swallow any trace of light between the trees. After taking care of business, I reached for a cigarette from my shirt pocket. I lit it and inhaled deeply, trying to relax, but a strange sensation persisted in my stomach. As my eyes adjusted to the twilight, I caught a sudden movement behind the vegetation. Initially, I thought it might be some wild animal, but there was something peculiar about how it moved between the shadows. I'd never seen an animal move with such agitation, as if it were fleeing from some threat. Suddenly, a human figure emerged slowly from the woods. It was a middle-aged man, appearing to be between 35 and 40 years old, tall, wearing faded jeans and a dark hooded jacket. The poor lighting made it difficult to identify details, but his movements were tense, nervous. My instinct immediately put me on high alert, as I hadn't expected to encounter anyone in this isolated stretch. There were no residences, businesses, or any sign of human presence for miles. I remained motionless, controlling my anxiety, and when he approached a bit closer, I calmly returned to the truck. I locked the doors and started the engine. For a moment, I considered accelerating and getting out of there immediately, but something stopped me. I remained watching through the windshield, seeing how he continued approaching with that disturbing presence I couldn't ignore. The man advanced with measured steps, unhurried, but also without hesitation. The hood partially concealed his face, but his eyes remained fixed on me as if he could see through the glass and metal. When he reached the passenger window, he raised his hand, and knocked on the glass. A shiver ran down my spine. Slowly, he brought his pale face close to the window, revealing sunken cheeks and eyes that betrayed sleepless nights. His cracked lips showed prolonged dehydration. Reluctantly, I rolled down the window just a few inches. "What's the problem, friend?" I asked with a slightly trembling voice, keeping my hands firm on the steering wheel. He let out a long, harsh sigh before responding with a hoarse voice. "I need you to call the police." I spent several seconds analyzing or trying to understand the situation. This man showed no visible injuries or any sign that would justify his presence there. The confusion encouraged me to question, "Is everything all right?" At that moment, he raised his hand to scratch his head, and that's when I noticed the knife in his fingers. I held my breath upon seeing the weapon. His eyes wandered in all directions, as if he didn't know exactly what to do with that blade. The metal reflected the moonlight, creating a sinister gleam. Before I could react, he murmured, "I came here to take my own life." His voice trembled as he continued, "I walked from town with this intention, but at the decisive moment, I saw my daughter's faces and realized I couldn't do this. I couldn't let my inner demons destroy me completely." A profound silence took over the environment. Only the soft sound of the emergency lights blinking broke the quietude. I didn't know how to react. I just stared at him with a tightness in my chest, faced with that unexpected situation. I grabbed my cell phone and called the police, remaining in the vehicle and keeping him under constant observation, fearing he might have some kind of breakdown. He remained motionless, tears silently streaming down his face. There was something strange about that crying, as if the tears didn't belong to him, as if it wasn't really him shedding them. I asked him to leave the knife on the ground before the officers arrived. Although he looked at me with a confused expression, he slowly opened his hand and let the weapon fall onto the gravel. When I finally spotted the red and blue lights reflected in the rearview mirror, I felt immense relief. The officers handcuffed him, conducted a search, and asked some questions before leading him to the patrol car. Before their departure, I approached the police car window to direct some words to him, as I no longer felt fear, only genuine curiosity. "Listen," I said, meeting his eyes again. "You didn't go through this in vain, understand? You managed to come out of that forest alive. Don't waste this second chance. Do it for your daughters." He didn't respond verbally, just nodded almost imperceptibly before being taken away. Many years have passed since that dawn, and even today I carry with me the memory of that encounter. Sometimes, traveling these same deserted roads, I feel as if he's still there among the trees, a presence that remains watching, waiting. I frequently question whether our brief interaction really made any difference, whether the authorities managed to offer him the necessary help, or if a part of his soul still wanders lost in that darkness. Since then, I avoid stopping for personal needs in isolated stretches of the highway. I carry the constant sensation that I might encounter realities again that I prefer not to face. I've been a truck driver for over 15 years, always traveling the highways of New Mexico, hauling cargo from one side to the other. I know these roads like the palm of my hand. Every curve, every climb, every stop worth making. I never imagined that a routine trip could completely change the way I see the world. But that's exactly what happened one night in 2010 when I was traveling the highway connecting Santa Fe with Las Vegas, New Mexico. I had made that route hundreds of times. It was a path I knew by heart. But that specific night, from the moment I hit the road, I felt something was different. The air seemed heavier, denser, as if an invisible presence was accompanying me from the first curves of the journey. My truck's headlights cut through the closed darkness that spread before me. The radio was acting up, only managing to pick up weak static, and when some music or news appeared, it would soon disappear again, swallowed by a strange silence that stuck to everything around like an invisible fog. The truck swayed in its normal rhythm along the road, and I calculated the distance still remaining to reach the final destination. I was tired and wanted to find a safe place to make a stop and rest for a few hours. The temperature had dropped considerably, but nothing unusual for that mountainous region. Even with the fatigue, I was certain I could complete the trip without problems. It was always like that on my journeys. That's when I spotted the small figure on the road. At first, I couldn't identify what I was seeing. It looked like something fragile and lost right in the center of the highway, like a shadow dancing between the beams of light from my headlights. I hit the brakes immediately. The sound of tires on asphalt echoed through the silent night, and then I saw clearly. A small boy, appearing to be about 6 or 7 years old, standing there in the middle of the travel lane. His clothes were dirty and all torn, and when he turned his eyes in my direction, the shine I saw caused me immediate uneasiness. I felt my stomach tighten right away. There was no way I could simply leave the child there, abandoned in the middle of the dark nowhere. What kind of person would do such a thing? I opened the truck door and stepped down onto the road. The cold wind of dawn hit my face as I approached the boy slowly, being careful not to frighten him more than he already seemed to be. "Hi there, little one," I said with the softest voice I could manage. "Is everything okay? What are you doing here alone on the highway?" The boy looked at me with those big, deep eyes. For a few seconds, I doubted if he was really there. He seemed so out of place and fragile on that empty, shadowy highway. But then he responded, and his voice came out like a weak whisper I could barely hear. "I'm lost," he said with a trembling voice. "I'm looking for my mom. I can't find her." My chest tightened immediately. Without hesitation, I crouched down to get to his same height. "Stay calm. We're going to find her, okay? Come with me. Get in the truck. It's not safe for you to stay here alone on the road." The boy nodded slowly and took my hand. His skin was cold as ice stone. It gave me a shiver that ran up my entire spine. I led him to the truck and helped him climb into the passenger seat. As soon as we got in, I turned on the heater and grabbed a blanket I always carried in the cabin. He accepted it without saying anything and covered himself completely, as if he were trying to protect himself from the cold or from something else I couldn't see. I resumed driving, the sound of tires on asphalt cutting through the silence of dawn. From time to time, I glanced at the boy quickly. He remained quiet, just observing the landscape through the window with those empty, distant eyes. I tried to make conversation, ask some basic questions, but he only responded with isolated words, almost soundless. I decided to concentrate on driving and look for somewhere we could get help. But that's when things started to change in an inexplicable way. At first, it was just a strange sensation, as if something was wrong, as if the air inside the cabin was becoming denser, and more suffocating with each minute. I looked at the boy sideways and noticed that his figure seemed less solid, more transparent. I blinked several times and shook my head, thinking it was fatigue playing some trick on me. But when I looked again, my heart almost stopped beating. The boy was disappearing before my eyes. His body, which moments before had been there beside me, was now just a weak shadow that was slowly fading away, as if the darkness itself was pulling him back to where he came from. I jerked the steering wheel abruptly and stopped the truck on the shoulder of the highway. My heart raced and cold sweat ran down my entire face. "Hey!" I shouted with a voice trembling with nerves. "What's happening here?" But the boy gave me no response at all. He continued looking forward, but his body was disappearing before my eyes. The blanket I had offered him fell empty on the seat, and then that sound began. It wasn't a normal laugh. There was nothing cheerful or funny about it. It was an empty, high-pitched noise that echoed inside the cabin, as if it came from all corners and from nowhere at the same time. I looked everywhere, trying to understand where the sound was coming from, but the boy had completely disappeared. Only that horrible noise remained, drilling into my ears and making me feel like I was losing my mind. I felt as if the entire world was crumbling around me. The truck, the highway, everything began to become blurred and distorted, as if reality was breaking into 1,000 pieces. The sound grew louder and more penetrating, until it became an inhuman scream that hammered in my mind and threatened to drive me completely insane. I screamed too. I screamed as loud as I could, trying to drive away the terror that had taken complete control of me. And suddenly, just as it began, the noise stopped completely. The silence that remained was total and deafening. I stayed there, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my fingers turned completely white. My breathing was out of control, and I realized I had tears running down my face, but I didn't remember crying. I looked at the passenger seat expecting to see the boy, but it was completely empty. There was no trace of him, as if he had never existed. It took me several minutes before I could move again. Slowly, I started the truck again and continued the journey. But nothing was the same as before. That highway I knew so well now seemed like a haunted and dangerous place. The shadows on the sides of the road seemed deeper and more threatening, as if they were waiting to swallow what remained of my sanity. When I finally reached a small town near Espanola, I stopped at the first gas station I found. I stayed there trembling, unable to organize my thoughts. The young man working at the station noticed I was in bad shape and came to see what was happening to me. "Everything all right there, friend?" he asked with a worried and curious voice. I didn't even know where to start. How do you explain what I had just experienced? How do you tell someone that I picked up a child on the highway and it disappeared before my eyes, leaving only a chilling sound as a memory? I shook my head. I couldn't form a complete sentence. Finally, after a few minutes, I managed to stammer something about having seen something very strange on the road, something that couldn't be explained with words. The employee looked at me with an expression that mixed understanding and apprehension. He came closer and spoke quietly, as if it were a secret that couldn't be heard by other people. "It's not the first time I've heard a story like that. There are old legends around here. You know how it is. They say there's a child on that highway. They say she died in an accident a long time ago, and her spirit keeps wandering around looking for her mother. From time to time, she appears to drivers, and it never ends well for those who cross paths with her. My heart froze completely. The young man's words echoed in my mind, and I felt a shiver rise from my legs to my neck. Without saying anything more, I nodded, paid for the gas, and got out of there as fast as possible. But the terror didn't go away. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that child disappearing into the darkness and heard her sound that seemed to come straight from the depths of hell. I knew it had happened for real. It wasn't a dream or something from my imagination. It was as real as the asphalt under the truck's wheels, as real as the cold that had frozen me to the bone that dawn. From that night on, I never passed through that highway again. Even having to work driving, I always looked for other routes, even if they were longer and more complicated. I didn't want to risk encountering that child again, or whatever that supernatural thing was. There was something on that road that wasn't from this world, something that didn't follow the normal rules of life. And I wasn't willing to face that a second time. I've been driving trucks for over 20 years on the highway, and I've seen a little bit of everything, but some things mark you forever. Among all the strange experiences I've had, one stands out as the most disturbing. It was in 2017, one of those endless dawns in the Mojave Desert in California. I was hauling a load of appliances to Phoenix, Arizona, a routine trip I had made dozens of times. Only this time there was a problem. My truck's headlights were in terrible condition. I had been putting off the replacement for months, and normally I could get by. But that particular dawn, with the road completely deserted, the darkness seemed heavier than normal. My failing headlights could barely pierce the blackness, and I had to strain to see the lane markings. The situation was so ominous that I even considered stopping and waiting for the sun to rise. However, I needed the money from the trip, and since it was a giant straight stretch without major risks, I decided to keep going. About an hour remained before it would start to get light when I spotted something moving rapidly in the distance. My first reaction was to think it might be a large animal crossing the road, so I hit the brakes hard. The sound of the truck stopping echoed through the desert silence in a frightening way. When I managed to see clearly what was in front of me, I froze. It was a car stopped right in the middle of the highway, with its hazard lights functioning and the passenger door wide open. It looked like someone had gotten out in a hurry and forgotten to close it. My truck had stopped just a few yards from the vehicle. I'm a guy who learned to defend himself in life, and I don't usually get intimidated easily. At that moment, more than fear, I felt curiosity. Maybe someone needed help or had some mechanical problem. I reversed slowly and stopped on the shoulder. I thought about lighting some flares, but since there was no sign of other people on the road, I thought it unnecessary. I got down from the truck still somewhat suspicious and approached the abandoned vehicle. The night was strangely calm, without a breath of wind, only broken by the rhythmic sound of the hazard lights. Under normal circumstances, it would be a dawn like any other. But in that absolute solitude, everything took on a threatening air. When I got close, I could see it was a common car, apparently new. The passenger door was indeed open, and as I approached, I confirmed there was no one inside. I checked the back seat, looked through the windows, nothing. It was completely empty, abandoned there, as if the owner had vanished into thin air. It was at that moment that a chill ran down my spine. The initial idea that someone needed help was replaced by a much more somber sensation. It was as if the car had been abandoned hastily for some serious reason. I looked around nervously, but the darkness didn't let me see much beyond the reach of my headlights. Even trying to calm myself, something definitely wasn't right. Curiosity spoke louder than prudence, and I decided to take a look inside the vehicle. I opened the door and saw that everything seemed normal at first glance. The key was in the ignition, but the engine wouldn't start. I tried to open the trunk, but it was jammed. I removed the key and unlocked the car, but the trunk remained locked from the inside. I decided to try through the back seat, and to my surprise, I managed to open the door without difficulty. What I found there left me even more intrigued. There were some crumpled garbage bags in the back, and a rope that seemed to have been used to keep something closed. I took one last look over my shoulder to make sure I was alone. It was when I approached the bags that the unexpected happened. A loud, dry shot cut through the silence of dawn. The shock was so great that I hit my head on the car's roof. Without hesitating, I grabbed the keys and got out of there as fast as possible. While climbing into the truck, I heard a hoarse voice shouting, "Hey!" from somewhere nearby. It seemed like someone was approaching. I started the engine in a hurry, but it almost died before finally catching and accelerating. I only thought about getting away from that place when I looked in the rearview mirror and had the biggest scare of the night. There was a man standing near the car I had just left. He was short, stocky, with red hair, wearing overalls and high boots. In his hands, he carried a small shovel and what appeared to be an old shotgun. Our eyes met through the mirror for a few tense seconds. Then he dropped the shovel and began waving desperately, shouting, "Wait," several times, but I had no intention of stopping. I accelerated even more and saw him trying to catch up to me on foot for a few yards before giving up and returning to his car. It was obvious he wanted to prevent me from leaving there, but that only increased my determination to get out. I thought I had escaped when, after about 5 minutes, I spotted headlights approaching rapidly in the rearview mirror. That's when true panic took hold of me. I called the police and tried to explain the situation, but I was so nervous I could barely form sentences properly. Meanwhile, the car got close to me and began honking insistently, as if it wanted to force me to stop. It was 15 minutes of pure agony. I drove as fast as I could while the guy chased me, not knowing what action to take. When I finally thought I could get rid of him, the damn guy got in front of me and braked abruptly, forcing me to slow down. A nasty collision almost happened. I was preparing for the worst when I saw a flashing light ahead. It was a police cruiser. At the same instant, the car turned to the side of the highway and disappeared into the desert darkness as if it had never existed. I stopped on the shoulder, and when the officers arrived, I told the whole story, still trembling with nerves. The officer wrote everything down, asked some questions, and said they would get in touch if they discovered anything. Of course, I never heard anything again. This experience completely changed my relationship with deserted highways. Today, when I need to cross isolated places at dawn, I can't get the image of that man with the shovel and shotgun out of my head. My friends' theories vary between criminal activities and more innocent explanations, but the truth is I'll never know what was really happening that night. What disturbs me most isn't even what I saw, but imagining what could have happened if I had stayed one more minute in that place. Since then, the solitude of the highway has gained a different weight, as if it carried secrets that are better left undiscovered. I've been working the roads for over 20 years, and I can say I've seen a little bit of everything in this profession. I'm Carlos. I'm 44 years old, born here in Guadalajara, and I've always had a passion for driving. There's a unique freedom in being on the road, feeling the asphalt pass beneath the tires and the wind coming through the window. The highways of Southern California became my second home over the years. However, no one prepares you for certain experiences that can happen during these long, solitary journeys. The more experienced drivers always tell strange stories when we're resting at truck stops. Stories about things that happen in the early morning hours when you're alone in the cabin. I used to laugh at these conversations, thinking it was just a way to pass time. Unfortunately, I discovered that some of these stories have much more truth than I imagined. It was on a night in 2007 that everything changed for me. It was one of those moonless nights, very dark, where even the stars seemed to have disappeared from the sky. I was making my normal route from Bakersfield to Barstow, a trip I had made hundreds of times. I knew every curve, every climb, every descent of that path. But that night, there was something different in the air, a strange sensation I couldn't identify. I had turned off the radio because I had a headache. Only the rumble of the engine kept me company as the miles passed on the empty highway. My colleagues always told me to leave something on the passenger seat during long trips, a cap, a jacket, any object. According to them, this prevented things from getting into the truck. I never took these beliefs seriously. I thought it was nonsense from superstitious people. That night I was alone in the cabin, with nothing on the seat beside me. I thought these stories were just talk to scare newbies. How wrong I was. When I got near mile marker 62, the road became narrower and full of curves between the hills. That's when I saw her for the first time. A woman dressed in black standing on the side of the road. She was completely motionless, looking directly at my truck. My first reaction was to think that maybe her car had broken down and she needed help. Even though it was strange to find someone in that place at that hour, I decided to slow down. As I approached, something about her posture bothered me. She didn't wave, didn't make any signal, just stayed there standing with her head down and dark hair covering her face. I felt a chill run up my spine, but I decided to accelerate and leave her behind quickly. I had barely passed her when I felt the truck sway slightly, as if someone had gotten on. My heart raced when I noticed a weight on the passenger seat. I turned my head slowly and almost had a heart attack. The same woman from the road was sitting there beside me. My blood froze instantly. I tried to say something, but the words wouldn't come out. Terror left me completely paralyzed. The silence was the part that gave me chills. She didn't breathe, didn't move, didn't make any sound. She just stayed there looking forward with her hands folded in her lap. I tried to concentrate on driving, but my hands began to tremble on the steering wheel. For a few seconds, I thought maybe it was fatigue, that my mind was playing a trick on me. I decided to pretend she wasn't there and continue driving. But when I tried to ignore her presence, it became even greater. The air inside the cabin became heavy and difficult to breathe. With each mile, the darkness around seemed to swallow the truck's lights. I would glance quickly at her, hoping she would make some movement or simply disappear. But she continued there, without moving, without looking at me, without making any sound. The nervousness turned to desperation when I heard a low whisper coming from her seat. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone was icy, like winter wind. At that moment, I knew I needed to stop somewhere. Desperation was taking over, and I felt I was going to end up losing control of the truck. I looked to the sides, searching for where to pull over, but the road was too narrow. I thought about accelerating to the next town, but every time I had this idea, she would turn her head in my direction, as if she knew exactly what I was thinking. Her eyes were the vision I'll never forget. Two dark, empty holes staring at me without blinking. There was no life in that gaze, only a deep anger you could feel in the air. She began to move her lips, whispering things I didn't understand, but it was as if her voice echoed directly inside my head. Desperation turned to total panic when I felt a strong pressure in my chest, as if something was squeezing my heart. It became difficult to breathe, and my hands sweated so much I could barely hold the steering wheel. The road was becoming increasingly narrow, and the ravines on the sides increasingly deep. I was trapped between falling into the hole or facing that thing beside me. Finally, I understood I couldn't continue like this. I needed to do something, but I didn't know what. I remembered my companions, the stories they told, the things they believed in. Some talked about praying, calling on God, but I was too terrified to think straight. The truck began to make curves without me wanting it to, and I realized I was losing control. That's when I looked in the rearview mirror and saw something I'll never be able to forget. That wasn't a normal woman. Her form was changing, her face distorting, and her eyes sinking even deeper. Her hair became a dark mass that moved on its own. It was never human. I screamed with everything I had. It was a scream of pure terror, one of those that comes out when you're certain you're going to die. At that exact moment, the truck left the road and we began to fall. Everything happened very slowly, the lights flashing, a terrible cold taking over the cabin, and the world disappearing into a darkness that wasn't natural. I don't know how I survived. The next thing I remember is lying on the asphalt with people helping me and some colleagues who arrived after the accident. The truck was completely destroyed, but I only had some cuts and broken bones. It was impossible to explain how I came out alive from there. I was in shock, unable to speak, but when they took me to the hospital, the questions began. No one understood how someone could survive that type of accident. The place where I left the road was known for being deadly. Many people didn't have the same luck I did. But what left everyone really disturbed was what appeared in the truck's camera recordings. In the grainy images, you could clearly see the woman sitting in the passenger seat. She was there in the footage, but the strangest thing happened in the last seconds before the accident. Her figure began to become transparent until it disappeared completely, as if it had dissolved into the air. They never managed to explain what happened that night. I can't either. This experience changed my life forever. I could never drive during dawn again. I retired a few months later, unable to continue in a profession that took away all my peace of mind. For years, I kept this story to myself, knowing that most people would think it was invention or that I had hit my head in the accident. But I know it was real as anything else in this world. Today, when I need to pass mile marker 62, I always look quickly at the passenger seat and say a silent prayer that it will never again be occupied by something that shouldn't exist. Some experiences mark you forever, and this was one of them. I learned that there are things in this world that our mind cannot explain, and sometimes it's better to accept that than try to understand. My name is Caleb, and I'm 32 now, living in a quiet corner of Albuquerque, New Mexico. Looking back, I can't pinpoint exactly when things started unraveling. Growing up, the bad was just normal. My childhood home in a dusty trailer park wasn't a home, it was a stage for chaos. Silence wasn't peace, it was the calm before the storm. I'm telling this story to piece together the fragments, to make sense of a past that still haunts me. My parents, Eddie and Susan, fought constantly. Their arguments started as a low hum, like static on an old radio, then exploded, filling our cramped trailer with venom. At 5, I didn't understand words like debt or betrayal, but the tone. That I knew. It made me shrink, want to disappear. I'd hide in my corner of the living room, behind a tattered curtain we called my room, clutching my baby brother, Felix, who wasn't even a year old. Mom would storm out at night, saying she was tracking down Dad, a cab driver who vanished for hours. I never knew if it was true. All I knew was I was left alone with Felix, his cries piercing the dark. At 5, I didn't know how to change a diaper or soothe his hunger. I'd hold him, terrified he'd slip from my weak arms, his wails blending with my own silent tears. When Mom came back, there were no hugs, just complaints. She reeked of cigarettes and asphalt, her eyes burning with anger at the mess, at us. I just wanted someone to ruffle my hair and say it'd be okay. The only peace I found was at Grandma Rose's little adobe house on the edge of town. Her place smelled of fresh coffee and cornbread, with cacti lining her porch. She'd let me curl up with her in a hammock, telling stories of desert spirits or teaching me a prayer to my guardian angel. That prayer became my lifeline. On the worst nights, when shouts rattled the trailer, I'd whisper it over and over, drowning out the noise until it faded to a distant hum. One night stands out. Dad slammed the door after a brutal fight, and Mom chased after him. Felix woke screaming, his cries sharp enough to cut glass. His bottle was empty. I fumbled with powdered milk and a clay water jug, spilling half the powder on the floor. I made a thin mixture, barely enough to quiet him. As he drank, his big, wet eyes locked on mine, I felt a grown-up fear, like we'd been abandoned, like no one would come if we needed help. Dad wasn't cruel, at least not to me. He just didn't fit in that trailer. His cab was his escape, and sometimes he'd take me along. Those were the good days. I'd sit up front, the desert wind in my face, washing away the trailer's stale air. He'd point out old adobe churches, or tell stories of his own childhood in Taos. He'd buy me a tamarindo popsicle or a bag of caramel corn from a street vendor. Those moments were gold. Then Vanessa appeared. She started as just another passenger, quiet with a shy smile, always in the front seat. Felix and I sat in back. At first, I thought nothing of it, but she became a regular. Our rides with her had no destination, just aimless drives through sagebrush-lined suburbs, the sun filtering through mesquite trees. Dad changed with her around. His voice softened, his eyes crinkled when he smiled. He'd tickle Felix, tell me jokes. Vanessa's presence lit something in him that our trailer snuffed out. I didn't ask who she was. Part of me didn't want to know. I was a kid, selfish in that way. I just wanted the dad who laughed, who noticed me. If she made that happen, I was okay with it. But that peace came at a cost I didn't understand. The bill came due on a sweltering Tuesday afternoon. I was stacking plastic cups with Felix on the trailer's linoleum floor when the door flew open, hitting the wall and shattering a cheap desert painting, our only decoration. Mom stood there, unrecognizable. Her hair was wild, her eyes red and wide, her breaths heavy like a cornered animal. She saw me, and something snapped. Before I could think, she grabbed my arm, her grip bruising. My memory fractures here, flashes of pain, her face inches from mine, screaming, "You knew. You covered for him." She accused me of hiding Dad's secrets, of betraying her with that woman. I was 8. I didn't know what cover meant. All I knew was the sting on my cheek, the ache in my arm, and the look in her eyes, like I was a stranger. Felix's terrified sobs snapped me out of it. I yanked free, grabbed his hand, and ran barefoot to the neighbor's trailer. Mrs. Lopez, a kind widow, opened her door, her eyes wide with shock. Between sobs, I begged, "Take us to Grandma Rosa's." At Grandma S., she cleaned my bruises with a damp cloth and gave us warm milk with honey. That night, Dad showed up. I overheard him confess to Grandma in the hallway. He didn't love Mom anymore. Vanessa made him feel alive. Grandma's voice shook but stayed firm. "A marriage can end, Eddie, but blaming a child, hurting your son, that's unforgivable." I slipped into Felix's room, curling up beside him. That night, I didn't pray. Words failed me, leaving only a hollow ache. We stayed with Grandma Rosa. Dad brought our clothes in a duffel bag and slept in her shed, but he was a ghost gone all day, silent when home. Grandma's house was a refuge, but even there, something shifted. I started feeling off, sudden shortness of breath, like my lungs forgot how to work. A warm spot between my shoulders, like a heated cloth pressed against my skin. At night, my toes tingled as if something brushed them. Sometimes my shirt tugged lightly, like Felix wanting attention, but no one was there. I told Grandma, expecting her to laugh it off. Instead, she listened, peeling oranges at her kitchen table. "Keep praying, Caleb," she said softly. "Your angels protected you before. It'll keep protecting you." I tried, but the prayer felt empty, a ritual born of fear. I started sleeping with the light on, blankets pulled tight, dreading the dark. One night I woke to Felix's whimpering, but he was fast asleep beside me. The sound came from under the bed, a low, mocking cry mimicking his voice. It slithered back and forth beneath the mattress. I froze, heart pounding, until I screamed for Grandma. She came with a flashlight, sweeping the beam under the bed, nothing but dust and an old slipper. "Just a nightmare," she said, but her hand trembled. I knew I hadn't been dreaming. The shadow grew bolder. Dad's health faded, deep circles under his eyes, a cough that tore through the night. He stopped taking us on rides, barely spoke. Grandma noticed. One night, I saw her rub his temples as he whispered, "It's like my head's splitting, Ma. Something's pressing inside." Felix started thrashing in his sleep, sobbing through nightmares I couldn't reach. Mom came for me at school one day, waiting across the street in her beat-up sedan. My body screamed to run, but I got in. Her voice was venomous, eyes glaring through the rearview mirror. "You ruined my life," she hissed. "You chose a new mom, didn't you?" I shrank against the door, tears silent. At home, she whispered, "You'll never escape me, Caleb. I'll always be watching." That night, I woke to a crushing weight on my chest, like someone pushed me into the mattress. I couldn't breathe, my body shaking, hands numb. I screamed, and everything went black. I woke in a hospital, the air sharp with antiseptic. Grandma said I'd been there 2 days, fevers, seizures, no explanation. Nightmares plagued me, a tall, insect-like woman with no face, clutching Felix until he turned purple. Her laughter was dry, cruel. When I returned to Grandma S, I avoided Mom. She'd linger outside school, but I'd hide in the office, begging them to call Grandma. She grew thinner, her eyes hollow, her voice unnatural, like she was mimicking a mother's tone. At 11, I learned Mom had died alone in her trailer, wasting away, silent. The nightmare stopped. Dad's cough vanished. Grandma's house felt like a home again, but the peace felt heavy, bought at too high a cost. Years later, in my Albuquerque apartment, I asked Grandma for the truth. She hesitated, then spoke. Desperate when I was sick, she'd sought a curandera, Doña Luz. The old woman said Mom, consumed by betrayal, had turned to dark rituals to reclaim Dad or destroy him. But her pain opened a door to something worse, a force that fed on our suffering, targeting Felix and me. Mom realized it too late. To save us, she let it consume her instead, taking it with her to the grave. Grandma showed me a rag doll, pierced with rusted needles, wrapped in Mom's hair, a relic of her final act. I don't pray out of fear anymore. Sometimes I light a candle for Mom, hoping she's found peace. I live for Felix and Grandma, the ones who never let go. The scars remain, but I choose to keep walking forward, carrying their light through the shadows. I'm Ellen, and this is the story of how I almost lost everything in our little ranch house outside Tucson, Arizona. My name doesn't matter as much as what happened. 10 years ago, my husband Walt, our kids, Ian and Chloe, and I had a good life. Our home, a modest stucco place with a sprawling backyard, wasn't fancy, but it was ours. A citrus grove out back and a vegetable garden kept us grounded. Walt worked at a warehouse in town, and I managed the house and kids. Weekdays were busy, school runs, chores, waiting for Walt's truck to rumble in at dusk. Weekends meant family barbecues at my mom's, the air thick with laughter and the smell of grilled carne asada. That's where it all changed. It was a Sunday at Mom's, the table loaded with tamales and chatter. My cousin Marissa showed up unannounced, gripping the gate like a scared animal. She was gaunt, her eyes shadowed, a fading bruise on her cheek. The porch went quiet. Mom, Donna, led her to a bedroom, and I followed. Marissa broke down, saying her boyfriend had hit her again. She had nowhere to go. Her parents' trailer in Nogales was too cramped. I felt a pang of guilt. Marissa and I grew up close, but life favored me, marriage, kids, stability. Seeing her broken, I knew I had to help. That night I talked to Walt. He rubbed his neck, uneasy. Bringing someone into our home's tricky, Ellen, he said, but I insisted she was family. He agreed, reluctantly. Marissa moved into Chloe's room on a spare mattress, her life packed into 2 duffel bags. At first, she was a blessing, quiet, helpful, brewing strong coffee that filled the house. She lightened my load, and I thought maybe she could stay longer. Walt kept his distance, or so I thought. Then things shifted. Walt stopped kissing me when he got home, stopped holding my hand during TV time. He'd toss a bag of oranges from the market on the counter and head for the shower without a word. I told myself it was work stress. When Marissa got a part-time job at Walt's warehouse, they started carpooling. I thought it was practical, saving gas money. But they came home later, blaming delayed shipments. I believed them. Why wouldn't I? Walt had never given me reason to doubt, and Marissa was family. A week into her job, Marissa gave me a gift, a small, round mirror with a tarnished metal frame etched with thorny vines. "To remind you how beautiful you are," she said, her smile tight. I thanked her but tucked it away in my purse, unsettled by its weight. Soon, the house felt heavy too. I was exhausted, my hands shaky, a sharp pain lodged in my neck. Money vanished faster than usual. Food spoiled quickly, rice turned buggy, beans molded. Walt snapped that I was wasting money, his words cutting deep. Ian grew defiant, throwing tantrums over nothing. Chloe, my chatterbox, went silent, sketching dark, jagged shapes she hid from me. They shied away from my hugs, eating quickly with heads down. I felt like a ghost in my own home. Then the strange things started. A trail of coarse salt on the doorstep. I swept it up, thinking a bag tore. The bedroom closet, always sticky, swung open at night. One morning, after a shower, I saw 3 thin scratches in the bathroom mirror's fog, like claw marks. I wiped them away, blaming an old flaw. Days later, I found the same marks etched into the wooden frame of our family photo from Ian's last birthday, right over my face. My stomach dropped. This wasn't coincidence. Marissa, meanwhile, bloomed. She wore tight dresses and bold lipstick, her hair loose and glossy. She and Walt laughed together on the porch, their voices stopping when I approached. I felt shut out, watching them build a world I wasn't part of. The breaking point came while cleaning. Under the couch, I found a small, black cloth bag tied with twine. Inside was damp soil and a tangle of hair, long, brown like mine. Nausea hit hard. This wasn't stress. Someone had planted this evil in my home, and I knew who. I didn't confront her. Fear kept me quiet, dry mouth, weak legs. I hid the bag in my drawer, wrapped in newspaper, and acted normal, but every glance from Marissa felt like a knife. The truth exploded on a Saturday morning. Walt suggested a family trip to the farmer's market for fry bread, a rare spark of the old him. I dressed up, hopeful. As we were leaving, Ian ran back for Walt's phone. He handed it to me, screen lit with a text. "Can't stop thinking about last night. Dying to do it again." No name, just a number. I dialed it, trembling. Marissa's phone rang in the kitchen, that annoying pop song she loved. Her smile faded when she saw me. She knew I knew. I faced Walt at the truck, holding out his phone. "Who's this?" My voice was steel. He stammered, pale, claiming it was a prank. "How long?" I cut in. He admitted it, months, Marissa coming on to him, filling voids I didn't see. I turned away, walked to Marissa, and said, "Get your stuff and leave." Now she opened her mouth, but I shouted, "Go, or I burn what's left." I locked myself in my room, staring at the wall, numb as the house fell silent. Walt didn't come home. Marissa vanished. The pain was crushing. That night, I wandered to the shed behind the house, smelling of rust and earth. I found a coil of rope, tied a noose, and climbed onto a crate. As I looped it over a beam, pounding on the front door stopped me. Ellen opened the door. It was Mom. I don't know how she knew, but her voice pulled me back. I dropped the rope and let her in. Her embrace broke me, and I sobbed out everything, the betrayal, the bag, the scratches. She held my face. "You need help, honey, not from a doctor." The next morning, she took me to Doña Rosa, an old woman with a herb stall at the mercado. Her eyes, sharp as a hawk S, sized me up. Without a word, she lit a white candle, prayed over a glass of water, and said, "This isn't yours, child. Someone put this on you to drain you, your family, your life." She took me to a back room, sweeping fresh herbs dipped in a pungent liquid over me. My stomach churned, and I vomited a thick black foam laced with hair and webbing, reeking of decay. Doña Rosa burned it, the smoke oily and black. She gave me a bitter tea and instructions. Scrub the house with salt and indigo water. Burn garlic skins and sage for 3 days. Bathe in rosemary, and keep salt water under our beds. The cleansing provoked a backlash. A kitchen bulb shattered, spraying glass. The TV, unplugged, blared static. Footsteps crunched in the yard at night, nothing there. Ian woke screaming about a long-haired woman by his bed. Chloe whispered to someone at her window, saying, "She sings to me, Mom. She'll come play soon." Walt called, his voice broken, saying Marissa's promises had turned to nightmares. He was vomiting, haunted. I told him the house wasn't ready for him. I found more, a cold, black stone under Ian's bed, a red ribbon with hair in Chloe's drawer, and that mirror, burning to touch. I took them to Doña Rosa. She smashed the mirror, burned the ribbon, buried the stone in salt. For the kids, she passed an egg over Ian, breaking it to reveal a black yolk. For Chloe, she blew sweet-smelling smoke and hung a camphor sachet around her neck. Peace returned, laughter, normalcy. But it was a trap. One morning, hanging laundry, I stepped on soft ground by the fence. Digging, I found a sealed jar with our family photo, eyes gouged, wrapped around a dead sparrow, bound in black thread. Across the road, under a palo verde tree, Marissa stood watching, her gaze cold with defeated rage. We locked eyes, then she walked away, swallowed by dust. Doña Rosa burned the jar in a circle of gunpowder, burying the ashes with salt. "It's done," she said, "but the scar stays. Stay vigilant." Life crept back to normal. The kids laughed again. I planted agave by the door for protection. Walt returned, broken, seeking forgiveness. I let him see the kids, but our marriage was ash. Marissa disappeared. Rumors said she boarded a bus to Sonora or wandered near the train tracks, muttering to shadows. The fear lingers. Every creak, every shadow makes me tense. I locked that door, but I'll never forget it was opened. I'm Diane, 29, working a steady job at a food company in Portland, Oregon. My life's predictable: traffic, spreadsheets, home, repeat. It's stable but hollow, and maybe that emptiness is why I said yes to her. Erica and I met as kids at a summer camp in Eugene. I lived in town. She came from a remote farm in the Willamette Valley, where cell service was a myth. She stayed with her aunt nearby during camp, and we clicked instantly. Erica was different. She didn't care about trends or boys. She talked about moon phases like they were the weather, knew every weed in the yard, and shared tales of her grandma, a healer of sick souls. At 15, I was hooked on her world, even if I thought it was just quirky folklore. We drifted apart after I moved for college. Our chats became sporadic texts, sent via neighbors' phones when she visited town. Her photos showed odd stone piles or dirt-drawn symbols, captioned about her path with a group who knew the old ways. I'd reply cool and change the topic. Then came the invite, forwarded by a cousin. Erica was turning 25 and wanted me at a small gathering at a rural retreat her group used. "Nothing weird," the message promised. "She misses you, Diane." I hesitated. Her path sounded like a cult from a Netflix doc. But midweek, staring out my apartment window at gray streets, I craved something more. I remembered our summers, her confidence, how she made the world feel vast. It's just a birthday, I told myself. What's the worst that could happen? I drove out on a Saturday, the sky orange as the sun dipped. The highway turned to a gravel road, then a rutted dirt track winding through dense pines. My pickup rattled, the GPS silent, cell signal gone. I followed Erica's directions. After the wooden bridge, take the second left to a barbed wire gate. Each unmarked fork tightened my chest. The forest was too quiet, no birds, no crickets. I found the gate at dusk, leading to an old Victorian house, its paint peeling, moss creeping up the walls. Other cars, beat-up sedans and trucks, sat near the entrance, easing my nerves slightly. I wasn't alone. A cold gust hit me as I stepped out, odd for the muggy evening. Erica emerged before I reached the porch, wearing a long black dress with silver-threaded embroidery, her hair in tight braids with obsidian beads. "Knew you'd come," she said, her hug too tight, her voice rehearsed. Inside, the air was thick with sweet, sickly incense and musty herbs. Candles cast flickering shadows across 20 people in heavy, dark clothes, staring at me with cold curiosity. No one spoke much, just murmurs of welcome or blessings. A bearded man handed me a clay cup with a bitter, earthy liquid. "Our welcome brew," Erica said, her smile not reaching her eyes. I sipped to be polite, the taste like dirt and whiskey, burning my throat. My head throbbed from the smoke. Erica led me to a back room, past tapestries woven with beetle-like patterns. The air grew heavier. The room was vast, with a long table holding no food, just candles, ash-filled bowls, and small, yellowed bones arranged in pentagrams. A black powder circle covered the floor. My gut screamed to run. "I need the bathroom," I stammered. Erica pointed to a small door, her face blank. "Don't take long, we're waiting." I locked myself in a tiny, moldy bathroom, the mirror warped, my reflection ghostly. The drink's dizziness worsened. My phone had 1 bar of Wi-Fi, the house. I sent my dad my location. "Dad, come get me. Weird place, I'm not okay." The message hung unsent. Banging started soft, then hard. Erica's voice turned sharp. "Deanna, come on." The doorknob rattled. I unlocked it before they broke in. Erica's eyes were ice, her grip on my arm bruising as she dragged me to the circle's center. The others closed in, a human wall. Most candles went out, leaving only those around the circle, making the powder seem to writhe. A low chant began, alien and droning, with a sea drattle's rhythm. My legs wobbled. A tall woman in a black veil approached, holding a candle and a curved, bone-handled dagger. Erica forced my hand up, palm open. The blade bit, blood dripping onto the powder. The floor pulsed like the house inhaled. A man's voice, Dad, screamed my name outside. The chant stopped. He burst in with 2 neighbors, their flashlights cutting the dark. Erica clung to me, shrieking, "She can't leave." Dad yanked me free, shoving me toward the truck. The veiled woman rasped, "Too late. It's accepted." We sped off, the house's silhouettes watching. At home, Mom cleaned the deep cut on my hand, but by morning it was infected purple, with a black vein creeping toward my wrist. The house turned hostile. Shadows moved in corners, cabinets opened overnight. My sister Josie, 11, woke screaming about a braided-hair lady staring from her room's corner. Whispers haunted me, cold spots chilled the air. Josie got 3 scratches on her arm, like claw marks. Dad punched the wall, cracking plaster. The thing I'd brought back was spreading. Dad returned with Mr. Flores, a curandero from the hills. He lit bitter herbs, swept them over me, and blew smoke on my hand. I retched, feeling something writhe inside. The air lightened, but he warned, "It's stubborn. It'll come back." It did. A framed Virgin Mary picture shattered. Food rotted, our dog growled at me. Josie's cough worsened, her eyes hollow. Neighbors avoided us. Mom collapsed one day, lips blue. Dad found Father Ignacio, a priest known for handling these things. At his stone church, he sat me in a chalk and dash circle, chanting in a tongue that shook the air. Pain tore through me. I saw the ritual house, the veiled woman grinning, Erica's eyes white. My scream wasn't mine, deep, feral. The priest pressed across to my forehead, burning. A cold breath left me, and I passed out. I woke in the truck, the black vein gone, the cut healed. Josie recovered, the house quieted. But something stayed. I feel it, calm but present. Small wishes come true, a call from an estranged aunt, a found parking spot. It's not gone, it's me now. Erica opened a door, and I'm its keeper. One day I'll have to settle her debt, and I know I will. I've been working as a trucker for years. I've driven this country from north to south, but I had never been through anything like this. This experience marked me so much that I decided to share it, even if it's just to try to understand what the hell happened that cursed night. I was driving down a completely empty highway with no one around. Those 4 hours seemed like they would never end. I needed to deliver some machine parts to a construction site in Utah, but it started raining in the first few miles. So I went really slow and paid attention. Rain in that region can be heavy, and with all that fog, you can't trust much. When I finally reached a more isolated area with dirt roads and enormous trees, I was already exhausted. The sky was full of thunder, and it looked like it was going to rain again at any moment. So I thought it better to stop for a while and continue when it got light. I found a really big tree and parked the truck underneath it. I ate a turkey sandwich that my wife had prepared. That food always reminds me of her and kind of calms me down. Then I opened the window to look around. It wasn't drizzling, but the wind made a somewhat sinister noise in the night that left me chilled. I closed the curtains, reclined the seat, and put my jacket over me to see if I could sleep a few hours before continuing the trip. But it didn't last long. Around 1 in the morning, I heard something that left me frozen. The driver's door handle started moving very slowly, seeming like someone was trying to open it, but very carefully, almost testing if they could get in. I got up immediately with my whole body tense. You know that feeling when you're sleeping heavily, and you hear a strange noise that wakes you up scared. About 5 minutes passed, and no car had gone by, no tire noise on the road. I decided to get up very slowly. I got close to the curtain and opened it slightly to look outside. Everything was dark, and I could only see the empty road with some giant trees. But at that moment, I heard a loud click on the passenger door handle. I stood there frozen with fear. I looked again, now even more tense, but there was no one there, just silence and a chill that ran up my spine. I started the engine, and immediately the sound filled everything, lighting up the path. High beams, taillights, everything working just right. The long road ahead of me remained deserted. There was no one hiding or any other vehicle around there. I calmed down a little, thinking it must be the wind, some strong gust, or a branch that hit the truck and made the handle move by itself. I wanted to try to sleep again, but this night wasn't going to be easy. At that moment, my senses became more acute, and I could hear every little noise in the chassis, every breath of wind that seemed to be watching me. Then something started to vibrate. It was the small vents, those on the side of the cabin that almost no one notices. It seemed like someone was scratching from outside very slowly, giving the impression of trying to open from the other side. And again the handle started moving, but this time with more force, with strong, repeated knocks. At that point, I started to get really scared because it didn't seem to be just one person. It had to be a group, several people together. And then out of nowhere, one of the hits on the bodywork started to sound louder, giving the impression that someone or something was climbing on top of the truck from behind. I felt a weight being placed somewhere, pressing hard. I couldn't see anything through the windshield, not even a movement. But in the middle of fear and desperation, I pressed the panic button for the truck's alarm to go off at full volume. Believe me, that alarm is a scream that would wake even the dead. But not even that made them go away. The thing didn't stop. Banging, scratching, and the sound of the alarm seemed like someone was messing with the handles nonstop. The suspension started making noise, indicating that the truck had a giant weight on top. The windshield glass started to crack in one corner, and at that moment, something started walking on the truck's roof, but I couldn't see anything. I was truly terrified. I didn't want to get out or move. I felt like my life was in danger. I don't remember exactly how long this whole confusion lasted, but suddenly everything stopped. The alarm turned off by itself, and there was complete silence, seeming like the entire world had paused. I could only hear my panting breath and my heart beating rapidly. A few minutes passed, and the headlights of another truck passed on the road, and at that moment I felt I was still alive. As soon as it dawned and light began to filter through the trees, I jumped out of the truck, quickly releasing the gear lever. I went out looking for footprints or marks throughout the entire area, and to my amazement, I found blood stains all over the truck. It looked like a gang of hungry zombies had attacked the vehicle and left wounds everywhere. Even on the small windows at the top and in the holes where there was a grate. There were marks of small hands, giving the impression they were from children who had pressed against the glass with force. It was total madness. These sticky marks were spread all over the truck. It was covered with dried and fresh blood stains. The sight was frightening. I had to clean everything before leaving because if any police officer stopped me, they would surely accuse me of something terrible. To this day, I still don't know what happened or who was doing all that on that night. I only know that with great luck, I managed to get out in one piece. Since then, I avoid traveling alone at night and always look for gas stations to stop. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night thinking I hear those sounds again. My wife says I've changed, that I'm more nervous and always looking in the mirrors. Maybe she's right. What I know is that that night changed something in me, and no matter how much I try to explain what happened, my mind simply cannot accept a logical answer for what I experienced. I've been working as a trucker for a good while, and I can guarantee one thing. The road teaches you a lot about yourself, especially during those long, solitary trips in the early morning hours. I dropped out of college for personal reasons, and everyone keeps saying I could have chosen a different profession, something more traditional, but honestly, I don't regret my choice. Of course, it has its challenges. What weighs most isn't the driving hours, but that deep silence of nights on the road that forces you to come face to face with your own ghosts. If you don't get right with yourself, that solitude can devour you from the inside. That's what happened to me in an experience I'll never forget. If you want to know the strangest story I've lived in these years, I can tell you. It happened about 3 months ago when I was still new at the company and didn't know much about the job. It was a night like any other, making a delivery from southern New Jersey to Lafayette, Indiana. A giant trip of about 12 hours total. At that moment, I had already been on the road for 8 hours and was starting to feel the fatigue. But I thought about toughing it out and finishing the trip in one go. If I continued through the dawn, I'd arrive around 3 in the morning and no one would be bothering me. The road was practically empty. Only a truck or another would appear from time to time, so I could speed up without problems. Halfway there, I remember reaching out to grab a can of energy drink, but where the hell was there one? Of course, I had forgotten to restock after the last delivery. I hit the dashboard a few times, sighed irritated, and realized I had no choice but to stop somewhere to buy something. I hate having to stop in the middle of nowhere, especially when I've already been driving for hours. And I don't know if this happens to you too, but for me, it's much more tiring to be stopped than to continue moving, even if it's just for a few minutes. I looked at the GPS, and to tell the truth, I had no idea where I was at that moment, but there seemed to be a gas station nearby, so I decided to stop there. Unfortunately, it wasn't exactly a functioning station, but rather seemed like an abandoned place with a little store that someone was trying to use again. I don't know how to explain that place better, but it gave the impression that they had dismantled everything and left it to the moths. However, a few yards ahead on the street, I saw there was another convenience store, and I thought I could try to buy something to drink there. I parked and went in, imagining that one of two situations would happen. Either the store would be open and I could buy what I needed, or it would be closed and I'd have to look for another place. To my surprise, when I pushed the door, it opened, but the entire store was plunged in total darkness. I could only hear absolute silence, and everything was dark except for a weak light that seemed to come from some distant corner. I looked around searching for some switch or anything to grab, but just when I was about to turn around, I noticed that weak light coming from the back of the store. I approached slowly and realized the light was coming from a room in the back, like a storage room or small office. I stopped for an instant, feeling a strange sensation run through my entire body. That sensation that puts you on maximum alert and screams that something isn't right. But curiosity ended up speaking louder. Very carefully, I opened the door very slowly, and to my surprise, there was a refrigerator, one of those plugged directly into the wall. All excited, I tried to open it hoping to find some drink inside, but it was completely empty. There was also nothing on the shelves around, as if they had removed all the stock or someone had emptied everything without any explanation. When I closed the refrigerator door, I swear I heard a loud noise coming from the main room, like something had fallen to the floor or broken. I was completely frozen for about 10 seconds, unable to move or understand what that sound was. It could only have been my imagination. It wasn't possible for it to be real. Very slowly, I went back to the front part of the store to check if there was anything out of place, but again, I found nothing. The store remained totally empty and silent. At that moment, to be completely honest, I didn't have the slightest desire to investigate anything else. I ran out of that place, walked a bit more, and found another store, this one functioning normally. I paid for my energy drink, which was exactly what I needed, and without wasting time, returned to the road. But before leaving, I took one last look and noticed something that left me confused. The door of the abandoned store was now completely open, even though I was sure I had closed it firmly when I left. Or at least that's what I remembered doing. Maybe the wind had pushed it, or maybe my memory was playing a trick on me. I couldn't find a logical explanation for that. So I simply started the engine and continued the trip. The caffeine began to take effect quickly, pulling me out of that drowsy state I was in. Little by little, my mind began to wander, and without realizing it, I started reflecting on how that whole stop had been bizarre. It definitely wasn't something normal, but what caught my attention most was that refrigerator working. I couldn't explain that, not even with the craziest theory I could imagine. Something inside me insisted that that empty, plugged-in refrigerator didn't make sense with everything else about the situation. I continued driving normally, but that's when I started noticing something very strange happening in the rearview mirror. There were movements in the back, specifically in the curtain that covered the cabin window. Sweat started running down my forehead, and when I looked more carefully in the mirror, I saw that the curtain seemed to sway and move by itself, even with the air conditioning completely off. That's when panic took hold of me. I seriously thought there could be someone hidden inside the truck, and I didn't have a gun or anything to defend myself with. So I quickly grabbed my cell phone and called the nearest police station. The 20 minutes it took me to get there were the longest and most terrifying of my entire life. My imagination ran completely wild, and I kept thinking about this mysterious person who could be trying to force the cabin door or even sabotage my truck somehow. In my head, the most chaotic scenarios possible were playing out, and in none of them did I come out unharmed from the situation. Finally, I arrived at the police station, and within seconds the truck was surrounded by several officers. When they opened the back part of the trailer, what they found inside will remain engraved in my memory forever. They removed 3 people from inside the truck, 2 men and a woman who clearly seemed to be homeless. They were wrapped in dirty blankets and completely disheveled. One of the men carried 2 switchblade-type knives, and all 3 absolutely refused to say a single word. They just stared at me with threatening looks, while the police put handcuffs on them. To this day, I have no idea what these people really wanted or what their plan was, hiding in my truck. Honestly, I think I'll never discover the truth behind all of this. What I know for sure is that their intentions were not good at all. And if I hadn't paid attention to those movements of the curtain, I probably would have found out in the worst possible way. This experience completely changed my way of facing solitary trips. Now, I always check the trailer before departing and maintain constant contact with the central office. The road can be a dangerous place, and sometimes danger comes from where you least expect it. I've been working as a driver for years and know these empty roads of Mississippi well. They're places where you can drive for hours without seeing a living soul. Flat lands that stretch until they disappear from sight, with these 2-lane highways that cut through the interior. The solitude of these trips becomes part of the routine. But that night, going from Clarksdale to Greenwood, I discovered that some places hold secrets we should never find. I had been on the road for more than 14 hours, stopping only to drink coffee and smoke a cigarette to ward off sleep. The weather turned suddenly. There was a strong wind alert on the radio, tornado warning, and a storm that was coming without warning in the Delta. Before leaving Clarksdale, I called my wife saying I'd call when I was somewhere safe. But about 30 miles ahead, when I thought I had passed the worst, enormous hailstones started falling from the sky. It started with small pebbles, but in seconds they became real stones hitting the hood and windshield with a metallic noise sounding like cannon shots. Anyone who lives in Mississippi knows that summer brings this type of heavy storm. So I had to stop at the first opportunity to take shelter. I pulled my pickup to the side of the road on the gravel and stayed there alone. There wasn't any vehicle nearby, just me and those dark lands that disappeared on the horizon. I turned off the engine, but kept the headlights on for safety. I opened the passenger window and pointed my flashlight outside, illuminating the surroundings. I could only see the cornfield swaying violently in the wind and some lightning flashes cutting through the stormy sky. I was observing all this when I looked to the driver's side. That's when I saw something I would never expect to find in a place like that. Right there, pressed against my window, was a man. He was standing with his face glued to the glass, staring at me with a cold, empty expression. His eyes had no life whatsoever. They looked like black holes, as if there had never been a soul inside. He looked at me for a few seconds, and when I thought he was going to move, he suddenly opened a smile. But that smile was the most terrible sight of my life. His teeth were yellow and crooked, and there was something about him that didn't seem human. I froze completely with my heart beating out of control. I yelled, "What the hell do you want?" But he didn't seem to hear me. The noise of the hailstones hammering the glass and the storm muffled any sound. He continued staring at me without showing fear or any reaction, as if the chaos outside didn't even exist for him. At that moment, I felt something was very wrong. Suddenly, a large hailstone hit him directly in the head, spattering blood all over the window. His body swayed with the impact, but remained there motionless, without moving a single muscle. That's when I understood that this creature had nothing normal about it. Something was deeply wrong with that being. A freezing chill ran up my spine, and without hesitating, I started the pickup and took off at full speed, gripping the steering wheel tightly. The man was still there, but then simply disappeared as if the wind and storm had swallowed him. I have no idea what happened next. I only know I accelerated like never before in the middle of that confusion, without looking to the sides or in the mirror, focused only on the road ahead. The rain continued punishing, and the stones that the tires kicked up echoed under the weight of the storm. But what tormented me most wasn't the storm. It was the terrible sensation that something continued watching me from the shadows, just like that thing I left behind. Since that night, I can't get that macabre smile out of my head, those disgusting teeth, that presence that definitely wasn't from this world. Today, whenever I need to pass through those lands, I feel that in the darkness between the storms, there's something lurking. Something that became very irritated at being discovered. I never wanted to travel those roads at night again because that experience marked my mind forever, and I can't forget. From that day on, I developed a disturbing certainty. There are presences on these empty roads that prefer to remain hidden. And when someone finds them by accident, like I did, they don't forget. Sometimes driving at dawn, I still feel those empty eyes following me through the rearview mirror, as if that creature was still there, waiting for the right moment to show those horrible teeth again. That's why today I avoid these nighttime trips as much as possible, because I know that some encounters leave marks that never disappear. I always thought the road taught me more about life than any school, but that night I learned there are lessons I'd rather have never received. The road can be a teacher, but sometimes the curriculum includes subjects that are better left unstudied. And some of those subjects have yellow teeth and eyes like black holes, waiting in hailstorms for unsuspecting travelers who venture too far into the darkness. My name is Miguel, and I drive trucks professionally. After so many years in this profession, you think you've seen everything. The routine becomes automatic: load, check, deliver. Payment doesn't come by the hour worked. So the strategy is simple. Be efficient, don't waste time, and make deliveries in the shortest possible time. Many younger colleagues believe that working more hours makes them better professionals, and I confess, I think the same way. Sometimes I like to believe I have more resistance than them, that I can handle long journeys without sleeping adequately and continue doing the job. However, this stubbornness can be dangerous, especially when fatigue is so much that we can barely keep our eyes open. About 4 years ago, I was at a depot in North Dakota. Anyone who knows this state knows it's an immense plain. Trips between cities are usually smooth, but that also means a few extra hours of sleep can determine whether you keep your job or get fired for irresponsibility. It was a cold May morning, and there was a lot of work ahead. Several loads needed to be delivered, and I wanted to resolve everything in a single trip. I mapped the route directly to Montana without any stops to rest. I left a few hours after lunch, planning to arrive the next morning. So I accelerated a bit beyond the permitted limit, but that didn't matter much, right? The night advanced, and I remember constantly rubbing my eyes to avoid falling asleep. It was already past midnight, and I still needed to sleep, but only 1 hour remained to reach the destination. So I gritted my teeth and continued driving. My colleague Raphael, who's also a trucker, had told me about some ammonium salts. They're crystals you carry in a small bottle, and when you inhale them, they wake you up instantly. They're very potent, and he warned me to use them moderately because they can cause dizziness or discomfort. But in that situation, any extra help was welcome. When I felt my body wasn't responding anymore and my head began to feel heavy, I grabbed the bottle and inhaled deeply, throwing my head back. Adrenaline took over me immediately, and I thought, this will sustain me until the end of the night. But of course, insistence on not stopping sometimes turns against us. About 30 minutes passed, and I already felt things were getting out of hand. It was as if my body was saying enough. At that moment, the noise of the engine and the truck on the road brought me back to reality. I realized I had almost fallen asleep in the middle of the lane, and that couldn't happen. I was in the middle of the woods with no gas station in sight, just trees on both sides. The speed was already reduced, and when I turned on the headlights, I saw something that left me frozen. There was a purple dress in the middle of the road. What the hell is that? I thought, blinking several times to confirm I wasn't hallucinating. But no, there it was in the middle of the asphalt, motionless, covered with leaves and dirt. I observed for a few more moments, and then passed slowly with the truck alongside, still incredulous. At that moment, it seemed like a horror movie scene, but it was happening for real. About 200 yards ahead, I also found some shoes. And they weren't common shoes, they looked like they belonged to a small child. That's when I started getting really nervous. What were these children's clothes doing scattered there? I began to sweat cold, and my heart accelerated. I sincerely prayed to God that it wouldn't be anything scary. I remember holding the cross my father gave me, as he was very religious and always sought divine protection in difficult moments. I was seeing all those clothes, but still couldn't understand what to think. Until suddenly, further ahead, right in front, on the side of the road, I saw even more pieces, many children's clothes piled up, as if someone had simply thrown them there. Without thinking much, part of me wanted to stop. I felt something was wrong, as if that pile of clothes was calling me. But at that moment, I was already too exhausted and just wanted everything to end. So I reduced speed and stopped the truck on the side of the highway. When I turned off the engine, I stayed there with my heart racing, almost getting out of the cabin to examine that pile of clothes. The cold dawn air cut through my skin, and this somehow helped me stay alert, although it also increased my nervousness. Very slowly, I approached cautiously, feeling that each step was foolishness. It was definitely children's clothing, small t-shirts, pants, some with cartoon prints. There seemed to be pieces for both boys and girls. I looked toward the woods, but in the darkness I couldn't see anything clearly, just the trees and enormous shadows. My mind was alert, worried it might be some trap or something worse. For a few seconds, I considered turning around and forgetting all that, but I couldn't do it. It wasn't right to abandon possible children in this situation, even if it was just a product of my imagination. So after hesitating for a moment, I decided to return to the truck. But just when I took a few steps to move away, I heard a loud crack to my left. I turned instantly, trying to identify the origin of the sound. It was silent for a few seconds, and then another crack from the opposite side. At that moment, adrenaline ran up my spine, and without thinking twice, I ran back to the truck. I jumped into the driver's seat, and before I could close the door, I heard a child scream. At that instant, I was paralyzed with my heart beating uncontrollably in my chest. What was a child doing screaming in the middle of the woods? Was it a game, a prank, or something more sinister? Before I could react, another scream came, practically identical. Without hesitating much, I started the truck again, turned on the headlights, and directed the light toward that spot in the woods. The headlights illuminated approximately 30 yards in that darkness. And there, among the trees, I spotted some human figures. 3 or 4 people, one of them holding a large speaker, crouched behind the trees exactly when my truck illuminated them. But I still had enough time to distinguish some details. They didn't seem to be normal people. They were hidden, trying to conceal themselves. And one of them with the speaker was screaming with a distorted voice, trying to attract me with false screams. At that moment, my mind completely froze. I sat there trembling, watching the trees and those figures that disappeared after hiding in the darkness. I grabbed my cell phone to call the police, but exactly when I dialed, there was a loud bang on the back of the truck. What situation was this? Someone had thrown something against the rear, and before I could react, I knew everything had gotten complicated. Whatever it was, I couldn't stay there. So I stepped hard on the accelerator and left at high speed. I had seen someone on the other side of the road shouting something incomprehensible. And suddenly something shattered the passenger window, a stone, a branch. I don't know exactly. I only know that at that moment I was desperate. I drove almost an hour without stopping in absolute silence, unable to process what had just happened. I was terrified and also very tired. Finally, I arrived at the place where I was supposed to deliver the load. As soon as I stopped, I thought of nothing but sleeping. I fell into deep sleep and believe I slept about 10 uninterrupted hours. When I woke up, the first thing I did was call the police and report everything. They said they would investigate those woods and would contact me with news. I reflected on everything that had happened and how imprudent I was to get out of the truck at that moment. But at that time, I couldn't stop thinking about what the hell those people were doing with all those children's clothes and what their intentions were. Why didn't they attack me when I spotted them? What would they have done if I had headed into the woods after hearing those screams? To this day, I don't have definitive answers. This experience changed my way of approaching the profession. Now, whenever I pass through isolated roads during dawn, I keep the doors locked and avoid stopping to investigate anything strange. That night taught me that not everything we find on the road has a simple explanation, and that some questions might be better left unanswered. What disturbs me most isn't what I saw, but what could have happened if I had made different decisions at that moment. Good evening, everyone. My name is Leo Barbosa, though most folks just call me Leo. I'm 32 years old and I live here in New Orleans, Louisiana. I'm the eldest of 3 brothers and was raised by my maternal grandparents. The story I'm about to tell you is one my grandpa Pete and Grandma Nettie have been sharing with me since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. Now I'm going to tell this story just like they told it to me, in their own words, because they lived through every terrifying moment of it. Both of them are still alive and sharp as tacks. Praise the Lord. Leo, you weren't even a twinkle in your daddy's eye when this happened. This was back in 1986, maybe 87. Your grandpa Pete was out of work at the time, and the only way we could put food on the table was by heading out to the bayou to catch crawfish, blue crabs, and whatever else the good Lord provided. Times were harder than a pine knot, but we made it through, thanks to the Almighty. So we decided to head out to Honey Island Swamp, just outside Slidell. It was me, your grandpa, and our dear friend Martha, who was expecting her first baby at the time. Lord have mercy, what we didn't know was waiting for us out there. We entered through the old boat launch around 8 in the morning and started working our way deeper into the swamp, setting traps and checking the shallows for crawfish. Pete had brought along a bottle of bourbon, you know how he gets, and was carrying on with his usual colorful language and tall tales. Martha kept scolding him. Pete, you need to watch that foul mouth of yours. We're deep in the bayou now, and you never know what spirits might be listening. Marie Laveau's ghost don't take kindly to disrespect in her domain. Now, for those who don't know, Marie Laveau was the most powerful voodoo queen Louisiana ever saw, and her spirit is said to still roam these waters. Pete just kept drinking and working, paying no mind to Martha's warnings. Then, when he stuck his hand into a hollow log to grab a crawfish. That ornery critter clamped down on his finger something fierce. Well, that set him off like a Roman candle. He let loose with every curse word in the book, and then some. Martha pulled me aside and whispered, "Nettie, you better talk to Pete. Marie Laveau's spirit is going to make us pay for his disrespect, and I can't be running through this swamp in my condition." That's when things started getting strange. The crawfish and crabs just disappeared. It was like they all went into hiding at once. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we hadn't caught a single thing. Then the wind changed just like that, out of nowhere. The cypress branches started swaying, and we heard this long, thin whistle echoing from deep in the swamp. Martha grabbed my arm. "Nettie, we need to get out of here. Something ain't right. Let's gather our things and get Pete moving." Problem was, we were a good hour and a half deep into the bayou, and the only way out was through the old logging road that led back to the highway. We started walking, but no matter which path we took, we kept ending up in the same spot. The sun was setting, and with all those Spanish moss-covered branches blocking out the sky, it got dark real fast. That's when our nightmare began. We saw a figure short and hunched, moving between the cypress trees. Couldn't make out what it was, but then came that wind again, stronger this time. We started hearing footsteps all around us, splashing through the shallow water. That whistle that had been far away was now close, so loud we had to cover our ears. And then we saw it, a shadow leaping from the muddy ground up into the tree branches, swinging from limb to limb like some kind of demon monkey, then dropping back down into the water with a splash. Pete finally spoke up. "Sweet Jesus, what in the hell is that?" Martha was trembling. "I told you, Pete. I told you to watch your mouth in Marie Laveau's domain. Now we better run and pray we make it out alive." But it was so dark we couldn't see 2 feet in front of us. Those whistles felt like they were coming from inside our skulls. Then we heard crashing in the treetops above us, followed by laughter, not human laughter, but something wild and cruel. That's when Pete got struck. Something invisible whipped him across the back, so hard it brought tears to his eyes. A few steps later, I saw him get shoved forward by what looked like a dark silhouette behind him. Whatever it was had actually put its hands on him and pushed. But here's the strange part. Martha didn't get touched, not once. That's when she remembered. I always carry a little pouch of tobacco when I go into the bayou. It's an old protection charm my grandmother taught me. I'm going to leave it on this fallen log along with the rest of Pete's bourbon and say a prayer. If this doesn't work, we're going to die out here. She moved away from us and placed the tobacco and whiskey on an old cypress stump. Then she knelt down and whispered something sounded like Creole French mixed with something older. When she finished, she said, "Now we walk, and don't look back no matter what you hear." The wind stopped. As we walked, we could hear splashing and that awful laughter behind us, like something was jumping up and down in the water, but Martha's offering seemed to be working. After about half an hour of walking, we found a path we'd never seen before. It wasn't our usual route, but it led us right back to the highway. When we got home around 8 that night, I couldn't believe the state of our legs and backs. Pete's shirt was torn to shreds, and we both had welts like we'd been whipped with cypress branches. Martha looked at us and said, "Our luck was that tobacco and the prayer I made. Pete, this should teach you that these things are real, and the bayou has guardians that demand respect." Pete asked her, "Martha, Why didn't you get hit like we did?" "I don't rightly know, Pete. I think it was because I had the tobacco, and maybe because I was carrying new life. Whatever it was out there, it left me alone." After that, we spent many more years working the bayou to survive. But Pete never brought bourbon again, and he kept his language clean. Every time we went out, he'd stop by Old Joe's bait shop and buy tobacco to leave as an offering. That's the story of how my grandparents met Marie Laveau's guardian spirit in the Louisiana bayou. That's the tale my grandparents told me, and I've never forgotten a word of it. Makes you think twice about showing proper respect to the old spirits that still watch over these ancient waters. Good evening, everyone. My name is Eric Martinez. I'm 29 years old, and what I'm about to tell you happened in the small town of Santa Isabel, New Mexico, where I grew up. I was about 10 years old at the time, and we were living with some relatives in a part of town that didn't have electricity yet. The house we shared was just a simple adobe structure, and that particular night, we'd run out of kerosene for our oil lamp. We were all sitting around the kitchen table after dinner, me, my mom, and our relatives, when the last flicker of light from our lamp died out, leaving us in complete darkness. "Mom," I said, "I'll walk over to Mr. Herrera's place and see if I can borrow some candles for tonight." The walk to his house was only about 300 yards down a dirt path. But in that pitch-black New Mexico night, it felt like miles. As I approached Mr. Herrera's property, something made my blood run cold. The wooden gate to his yard swung open by itself, not blown by wind, mind you, because there wasn't even a breeze that night. It just creaked open slow and deliberate, like invisible hands were pushing it. My whole body broke out in goosebumps, but I told myself I was being silly. I stepped through the gate, and that's when I saw it. Standing maybe 20 feet to my left was something that still haunts my nightmares to this day. It was taller than any man I'd ever seen, draped in a black hooded cloak that seemed to absorb what little starlight there was. But the worst part, where its face should have been, there was nothing. Just an empty void of darkness deeper than the night itself. I froze like a deer in headlights. My legs wouldn't move, my voice wouldn't work. I just stood there staring at this impossible thing. That's when it started moving toward me. I don't know how I found the strength, but I turned and ran. Behind me, I could hear it coming, not footsteps exactly, but more like the sound of wind rushing through dry leaves. I looked back once and saw it gliding across the ground, not walking but floating, getting closer with every second. In my panic, I grabbed a piece of broken fence post and hurled it at the thing. The wood passed right through it like it was made of smoke. But instead of stopping, the figure rose up even higher, towering over me like some kind of desert djinn. Then, as I watched in terror, it began to shrink. Smaller and smaller it got, until it was no bigger than a child. And then, just like that, it vanished into the mesquite bushes. I ran home faster than I'd ever run in my life, bursting through our door like the devil himself was chasing me. When I told my family what had happened, some believed me. Others thought it was just a boy's imagination running wild in the dark. But I know what I saw that night. It looked like death itself had come calling, and for reasons I'll never understand, it decided to let me go. That was my encounter with whatever spirits roam the high desert of New Mexico. Even now, 20 years later, I still get chills thinking about that empty hood and the way it moved without touching the ground. Some things you just never forget. Hello everyone, my name is Ana Claudia, and I'm from the Central Valley here in California. This story takes me back to when I was 13 years old and absolutely obsessed with becoming a rock star. Back then, my dream was to learn guitar and start my own band. You know how teenagers are with their big dreams. One day, I went out to buy a music magazine and came home with a guitar instead. My parents weren't too happy about that impulsive purchase, let me tell you. I signed up for group lessons, but they were terrible. Too many students, not enough attention from the instructor. I went once and never returned. That's when my best friend Rita, who I'd known since elementary school, offered to help. She said her older brother Jake played guitar and could give me private lessons. I jumped at the chance. When Jake first came to our house to discuss lessons, I was immediately smitten. He looked exactly like a young John Travolta, dark hair, bright smile, and the kind of charm that could light up a whole room. He was just the sweetest guy you could imagine. We agreed on a price, and I started taking lessons. But after 2 or 3 sessions, I realized that guitar and I just weren't meant to be. It was all flash and no substance. My musical phase burned out as quickly as it had started. But Jake and I became friends. Even though I thought I was too chubby and awkward to be attractive, Rita told me that Jake thought I was really cute. That just made me admire him even more, not romantically. But he was just such an enchanting person to be around. Time passed and we lost touch. I was 16, almost 17, and this was around late 1987, early 88. I was in my bedroom getting ready for New Year's Eve, trying on different outfits and making plans with friends. I glanced over at my guitar, which had been gathering dust in the corner, and decided to give it one more try. I sat on my bed and strummed a few chords, laughing at the awful sounds coming out of it. I really was terrible. While I was sitting there, lost in thought about my failed musical career, something happened that changed everything. Bang, bang, bang. 3 thunderous knocks on my bedroom door, so loud and forceful that my whole room seemed to shake. I jumped up and ran to the door. "Mom," I called out to the kitchen. "What was that? Did you knock on my door?" "What are you talking about, Mija?" she called back. "You going crazy in there? Just get ready, everyone's coming over soon." I stood there confused, staring at my door. Who could have knocked like that? The sound was so powerful, so deliberate. It felt important somehow, like someone was trying to tell me something. I looked back at my guitar and for some reason thought about Jake. I put the instrument away and tried to shake off the strange feeling, but something had shifted. The excitement I'd felt about New Year's Eve was gone, replaced by an odd sense of melancholy. We celebrated that night, but I couldn't stop thinking about those 3 knocks. Months passed, and one day I was walking home from visiting my grandmother when I ran into Rita on the street. We hadn't seen each other since 8th grade, and I noticed she looked unusually sad. We chatted for a while, and eventually I asked about Jake. Rita's face crumpled. "Anna, I have to tell you something. Jake died." My heart stopped. "What, when?" "On New Year's Eve," she said, tears streaming down her face. "He was driving to pick up his girlfriend in Modesto when he lost control on Highway 99. The car flipped 3 times. He died instantly." "What time did this happen?" I asked, though somehow I already knew. "Around 9 o'clock at night. He left his house at 8:45. The pieces fell into place like a puzzle solving itself. Those 3 knocks on my door, they had come at exactly 9 o'clock on New Year's Eve. I had checked the clock right after it happened. I told Rita about the knocks, and we both broke down crying right there on the sidewalk. Jake had somehow found a way to say goodbye. Even now, whenever I look at that old guitar collecting dust in my closet, I think about my dear friend Jake and wonder if he's still out there somewhere, watching over those of us who remember him. Some connections transcend death itself, and love finds a way to reach across the veil when we need it most. Good evening, everyone. To protect the people involved in what I'm about to tell you, I'm going to change most of the names, except my own. But what I'm sharing with you here was as real and terrifying as anything I've ever experienced. Since I'm not much of a writer, my son helped me put this story together, cleaning up my grammar but keeping every detail exactly as it happened. My name is Norman Bradley, and I work as a driver in a small town called Sweetwater, Texas. I transport people between towns for medical appointments, shopping trips, and sometimes tourism. I also do local runs, taking folks to the bank, the doctor, or out to the rural communities that dot our desert landscape. It was through this work that I got to know most of the people in the farming communities around Sweetwater, including a married couple who lived about 15 miles out of town. This couple ended up pulling me into the most terrifying encounter with evil I've ever experienced. I don't belong to any particular church, but I believe deeply in Jesus Christ. I know He's good and powerful, and I'm certain it was that faith that saved my life the day I came face to face with the devil himself, separated only by the glass windows of my truck. I've been living in Sweetwater for about 20 years now, ever since I married my wife Sarah, who was born and raised here. She wanted to stay close to her parents after we got married. This happened during Lent in 2009. I can't remember the exact date, but I know it was a Wednesday afternoon around 2 o'clock. I had just returned from a trip to Odessa and was taking a nap on the living room couch after lunch. My boy woke me up, saying there were people at the front gate asking for me. When I went to see who it was, I found Mrs. Alina and her husband Oscar, a couple I knew from one of the farming communities. I invited them in, and Alina got straight to the point. She told me her son was dating a girl she didn't approve of, and she wanted to hire me to drive them to see someone who could handle situations like this. The place was way out near the Texas-New Mexico border, too far for Oscar to drive his old pickup. She explained they wanted to pay someone to cast a spell that would break up her son's relationship and make him forget about the girl entirely. I thought this was a terrible idea. I tried to convince Alina to let her son live his own life, choose his own girlfriend, but she wouldn't hear any of it. She was determined. Since I needed the money, we agreed on a price for the trip to Friday afternoon. Before leaving my house, both Alina and Oscar made me promise not to tell anyone about our destination. They were terrified their son would find out and rebel even harder against their wishes. Friday evening around 5 o'clock, they arrived at my house and we set off. The drive to the New Mexico border was mostly on paved highways, but after we passed through a small town called Lovington, Oscar, who was navigating, told me to turn off onto a dirt road. We drove for what felt like hours on this narrow, unpaved track. There were no houses, no streetlights, nothing but scrubland and mesquite bushes stretching endlessly in both directions. The isolation was complete and unsettling. I was seriously regretting taking this job, but we were committed now. There was nothing to do but keep driving into that desolate landscape. Around 7:30 that evening, we finally reached our destination. To my surprise, the driveway was full of expensive vehicles, luxury cars, trucks, even one with government plates from a nearby county. Whatever was happening here, it attracted wealthy and powerful people. The house itself was much larger and nicer than I'd expected, more like a ranch headquarters than the shack I'd imagined finding in the middle of nowhere. I parked in front of the house, and Alina and Oscar got out. Oscar asked if I wanted to come inside with them, but something about the place made my skin crawl. I told them I'd rather wait in the truck. Oscar mentioned there was a small town about 5 miles further down the road where I could get something to eat and drink while they conducted their business. He estimated they'd be done around 10 o'clock. I drove to the little town, found a bar, and spent the evening playing pool and chatting with locals. Around 9:30, I headed back to pick up my passengers. When I arrived, I parked about 100 yards from the house instead of right in front. It was a hot night, so I got out of the truck to stretch my legs and get some air. That's when nature called. I grabbed some tissues from my truck and walked into the desert brush to relieve myself. I found a small arroyo and walked down into it for privacy. While I was taking care of business, I started hearing strange sounds coming from deeper in the desert, some kind of chanting or singing, but not in English or Spanish. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate. I crept through the scrub brush toward some flickering lights I could see in a clearing about 50 yards away. When I got close enough to see clearly, I wish I had turned around and run. There was a circle of black candles stuck in the sand, and inside that circle was a naked man lying on his back, writhing and speaking in what sounded like Latin or some other ancient language. He seemed to be in agony or ecstasy. I couldn't tell which. I should have left immediately. I should never have been there in the first place. But I stayed and watched, and that's when the man began to change. His body started stretching and contorting in ways that weren't humanly possible. That's when I finally came to my senses and ran, crashing through the brush back toward my truck. But before I could reach it, I heard sounds that will haunt me until my dying day, screaming that mixed human voices with animal howls, like coyotes and mountain goats crying out in unison. My legs were shaking so bad I could barely walk. I managed to get into my truck and lock the doors, then sat there in the darkness trying to process what I'd seen. Soon I heard footsteps crunching through the gravel and sand, coming from the direction of the ritual site. When I looked toward the road, I saw something that still makes me break out in a cold sweat. It wasn't a man anymore. It was a creature black as midnight, walking upright on 2 legs, but with the head and horns of a goat. It wore a flowing cape that seemed to move independently of any wind. Only my faith in God kept me from fainting right then and there. This thing walked directly toward the house where Alina and Oscar were conducting their business. It stopped in front of the building, spread its arms wide, and let out a roar that shook the ground beneath my truck. I tried to start the engine so I could get out of there, but the truck wouldn't turn over. The engine just wheezed and died. Panic set in, but the creature didn't seem to notice me. A woman came out of the house and walked toward the beast. She knelt in front of it, and the creature threw its cape over her. I couldn't see exactly what happened next, but I heard more of that awful screaming and chanting. After several minutes, the woman returned to the house, moving like she was in a trance. The creature then turned and started walking directly toward my truck. It stopped right in front of my vehicle, and I got a clear look at pure evil. Its eyes glowed red like hot coals. It started sniffing the air, and with each sniff, my heart pounded harder. Even inside the truck, I felt an overwhelming heat and started sweating profusely. The only thing I could do was pray. I closed my eyes and prayed with every ounce of faith I had, begging God to protect me from this demon. While I prayed, the creature let out another deafening roar, but then everything went silent. When I opened my eyes, it was gone. A few minutes later, Alina and Oscar came out of the house. I started the truck. This time it worked perfectly and drove over to pick them up. As we drove away from that cursed place, I told them what I had seen. Alina just laughed and told me I was being ridiculous, but Oscar looked genuinely shaken. We were driving through a crossroads about 10 miles from the house when that thing appeared again, standing right in the middle of the intersection. As we passed, it leaped onto the back of my truck with such force that it almost sent us off the road. Alina started screaming. The creature clung to the tailgate for several terrifying seconds before finally letting go and disappearing back into the desert with one final, triumphant roar. When we got back to Sweetwater, I told Alina and Oscar they had been dealing with forces of darkness that would bring nothing but misery to their family. Alina remained stubborn, but Oscar seemed to understand the gravity of what we'd witnessed. 15 days later, Alina called wanting me to make another trip to that place. I refused, telling her that not even all the money in the world would get me to go back there. Ironically, that same month, the girlfriend decided to break up with Alina's son and moved to Dallas to start a new life. But instead of being happy, the young man fell into a deep depression. He never recovered from the heartbreak and has been struggling with mental health issues ever since. Later, I learned that the house we visited was run by a married couple. The wife performed the rituals, and the husband was the one who transformed into that demonic creature. As for Alina and Oscar, their obsession with dark forces eventually consumed them. Alina became bedridden with a mysterious illness that doctors couldn't diagnose, and Oscar suffered a series of strokes that left him unable to care for himself. The spell they paid for didn't just break up their son's relationship, it destroyed their entire family. This experience taught me that some doors should never be opened, and some prices are far too high to pay, no matter how much we want something. Evil is real, friends. I've seen it face to face. But so is the power of faith, and sometimes that's the only thing standing between us and the darkness. My name is Nicole, and I'm from a small town in southern Oregon. 5 years ago, my family and I had an experience on a lonely stretch of highway that still haunts me. It's the kind of story that makes your skin crawl, and I'm sharing it with you now, so brace yourselves. Back in 2020, a horrific accident shook our tight-knit community. On a winding road leading to our town, a pickup truck collided head-on with a semi in a notoriously sharp curve. The crash was catastrophic. The two men in the pickup, brothers and close friends of my dad, didn't survive. Their loss left a heavy shadow over our town, and that road became a place folks whispered about, calling it cursed. One evening, about a week after the tragedy, my family had to make a trip to a neighboring city. My parents, my younger brother, and I set out early in the morning. The day went smoothly, but we got delayed and couldn't head back until after dark. That meant driving down Highway 17, a desolate, pitch-black road known for accidents and the occasional robbery. Nobody sensible travels it at night, but we had no choice. It was past 7 in the evening when we started the drive back. I was in the passenger seat, my dad behind the wheel, my mom in the back with my little brother asleep on her lap. The road was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your chest. We were chatting softly to keep the mood light when we approached that infamous curve where the brothers had died. Suddenly, headlights blazed from the opposite direction, a massive logging truck barreling toward us at breakneck speed. Its high beams flooded the road, turning night into day for a split second. And in that fleeting moment, we all saw it, a figure standing stock, still in the middle of our lane. It was a man, or at least the shape of one, pitch black like a shadow cut from the night itself. No face, no features, just a void in human form. My mom and I screamed, certain we were about to hit him. My dad, reacting on instinct, yanked the wheel hard to avoid both the figure and the oncoming truck. Our car swerved toward the shoulder, tires screeching, inches from disaster. We skidded to a stop, hearts pounding, and immediately checked the rearview mirrors. Nothing. No figure, no man, no trace of anyone on the road or in the ditch. It was as if he'd never been there. Dad's face was pale, his hands trembling on the wheel. "You saw him too, right?" he whispered. Mom and I nodded, our voices shaky as we confirmed it. We sat there, frozen, trying to make sense of what we'd just seen. How could someone be standing in the middle of a highway at 8 at night, silent and unmoving, only to vanish without a trace? The air in the car felt heavy, oppressive. None of us spoke for the rest of the drive. The silence was louder than any words could have been. When we finally pulled into our driveway, Dad broke the tension with a sentence that still chills me. One of those brothers tried to take us with him tonight. So listeners, if you're easily spooked, this might be your cue to pause. The stories that follow are just as unsettling, and I warned you, this isn't for the faint of heart. I'm Santiago, and I used to drive a cab in a small town outside Albuquerque, New Mexico. Back in 2000, I had an encounter that changed how I see the world. It was one of those nights that sticks with you, no matter how many years pass. I'd been driving taxis for a few years, and my routine was simple. When the night got slow, I'd cruise the streets one last time before heading home. You never know when you might pick up a late fare. That night, around 1 in the morning, I was about to call it quits. I was rolling down a quiet side street when I saw someone flag me down at a corner. As I pulled up, I recognized him, Mr. Henry, my neighbor. He was a cheerful guy, always cracking jokes, the kind of person who lit up a room. But that night, he looked different. He was dressed in a sharp black suit, like he was headed to a funeral or a gala, standing alone under a flickering streetlight. No wife, no kids, just him, serious and still. It threw me off, but I shrugged it off and stopped. "Hey, Mr. Henry, looking fancy. Need a lift home?" I called out, trying to keep it light. His voice was flat, almost hollow. "Take me to Cedarville," he said. Cedarville was a small town a few hours away, deep in the desert. I hesitated. I was exhausted, and it was late, but the fare was too good to pass up. "All right, let's go," I said, and he climbed into the backseat, which was odd. He always sat up front, chatting my ear off. Not tonight. The drive was quiet, too quiet. I tried cracking jokes, asking about his day, but he barely responded, just short yes or no answers, his eyes fixed on the dark desert outside. It was the Mr. Henry I knew. He seemed weighed down, like something heavy was sitting on his soul. I kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror, but he just stared out the window, his face unreadable. After a few hours, we reached Cedarville. He directed me down a dirt road, past old adobe houses, until he pointed to a rundown ranch-style home. "Stop here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I pulled over and turned to give him the total. "All right, Mr. Henry, that'll be," but he was gone. The back seat was empty. I jumped out, heart racing, thinking he'd bolted without paying. I checked the street, the yard, even knocked on the house's weathered door. Nothing. The place was dark, abandoned. I shouted his name, my voice echoing in the empty night. A neighbor, an elderly woman, poked her head out from across the street. "Nobody else lived there in years," she said. "The owners moved to Albuquerque yesterday." My blood ran cold. That's where I'd picked him up. I got back in the cab, my mind spinning. Had he slipped out without me noticing, run off? But that wasn't like him. I drove home in a daze, replaying the night over and over. When I pulled into my street, I saw lights and a tent outside Mr. Henry's house. Music drifted through the air, and I thought, this guy stiffed me and threw a party. I stormed inside, still fuming, and told my wife about it as I got ready for bed. "Can you believe it? Mr. Henry didn't pay, and now he's got a party going." She sat up, her face pale. "Santiago, that's not a party. It's his wake. Mr. Henry passed away yesterday afternoon in the hospital." I froze, staring at her. "No, that's impossible. I drove him to Cedarville tonight." She didn't say anything, just looked at me like she wasn't sure if I was joking. I ran to his house, pushing through the crowd of mourners. There, in the open casket, was Mr. Henry, wearing the same black suit he'd had on in my cab. I leaned in close, whispering, "You didn't have to scare me like that, Mr. Henry." Even now, when I think about that night, I get chills. But I like to think that ride was the one he needed to take, his final journey home. My name's Carlos, and I've been driving a taxi in rural Arizona for years. Back around 2001, I had a fare that still makes me question what's real. It was one of those trips that starts ordinary, but ends up somewhere you can't explain. I was washing my cab on a quiet street in Tucson one afternoon when a young guy, maybe 25, approached me. He was well-dressed, suit and tie, but quiet, almost too calm. He asked if I could take him to a place called San Miguel. A small town, he said, was about 2 hours into the desert, up near the mountains. I'd never heard of it, but when he pulled out a stack of cash and offered double my usual rate, I couldn't say no. I told my wife I'd be back soon, grabbed my keys, and we hit the road. The drive was tough, gravel roads, winding through rocky hills under a fading sun. The guy didn't say much, just gave directions now and then. We finally reached a small village just after dark. San Miguel was like stepping back in time. Old adobe houses, dirt streets, clothes hanging on lines, and faint smoke curling from chimneys. The place was lit up, windows glowing softly, but it was dead silent. No people, no voices, not even a dog barking. It felt off. "You sure anyone lives here?" I asked, half joking. He just nodded. "This is where I was born." He pointed to a house with a rusted gate and told me to stop. He paid the exact fare, stepped out, and walked inside without a word. I turned the cab around, ready to head back, but when I tried to retrace my path, I couldn't find the way out. The road seemed to loop, leading me past the same houses over and over. I drove for nearly an hour, my stomach twisting as I realized I was lost in a town that felt too still, too empty. Finally, I stumbled onto a narrow track that led to a highway. Relieved, I sped back to Tucson, vowing to look up San Miguel later. The next day, I asked other drivers about it. Nobody had heard of it. I checked maps, called locals, nothing. San Miguel didn't exist. A week later, I took my wife and kids to find it, thinking it'd make a fun day trip. I followed the same route, found the same dirt road, but when I reached the spot, there was nothing but open desert. No houses, no smoke, no town. I told my family I must have taken a wrong turn, but deep down, I knew better. That place was real for one night, and then it was gone, like it had never been there at all. I'm Diego, and I've been a taxi driver in rural British Columbia since I was 22. In 2001, I had a night that marked me for life, a story I'll never shake, no matter how many fares I take. It was around 1 a.m, and I was parked outside a gas station on a quiet stretch of the Trans-Canada Highway, ready to call it a night. The road was dead, not a soul around. Then a man in his 50s approached, wearing a worn jacket and carrying a backpack, like he'd just finished a long shift. He asked if I could take him to a small village called Pinewood, about an hour away. I needed gas, so I told him to hop in and give me a minute to fill up. He nodded, climbed in, and we started chatting as we drove. He was friendly, telling me about his job at a nearby mill, making the ride feel easy despite the dark, unlit roads. I dropped him off at a secluded lane in Pinewood, and he paid me with a smile before disappearing into the night. The return trip was where things got strange. I was crossing a narrow bridge over a river, the kind of place where the forest feels like it's closing in. That's when I saw him, a boy, maybe 10 years old, standing on the side of the road, right against the bridge's guardrail. He had no shirt, no shoes, just a pair of tattered shorts. His head was down, arms limp, like he'd been scolded and left there. "What's a kid doing out here?" I muttered, my stomach churning. I didn't stop. Something about it felt wrong, like the air was too heavy. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and he was still there, motionless in the cold. I kept driving, debating whether to turn back, but the road was too narrow. A few minutes later, after a sharp curve, I saw him again. The same boy, standing in the same pose, this time by a stone wall. My heart pounded. There was no way he could have moved that fast, not out here in the middle of nowhere. I slowed down, my hands sweating on the wheel. The air in the cab felt thick, like someone or something had joined me. I checked the mirror, and there he was, sitting in the backseat, staring straight ahead, shirtless and silent. I slammed on the brakes, jumped out, and stood there, trembling, my breath visible in the freezing air. My head throbbed, and I could barely think. When I finally worked up the nerve to look back at the car, he was gone. No sign of him on the seats, the road, or anywhere else. They say a kid died on that bridge years ago, hit by a car in a hit and run. I don't know if it's true, but I know what I saw. That boy, or whatever he was, rode with me that night. I'm Maria, and I grew up in a rural community in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. 9 years ago, when I was 20, I had an experience that turned my skepticism into belief. This is my story, and it's not for the faint of heart. Our house sat at the edge of town, backed up against a dense forest. Across the street was an open field where my cousins and I played volleyball and basketball every afternoon. It was our ritual, our escape. The area had its share of ghost stories. Locals swore they heard cries in the woods at night, whispers of a spectral woman who wandered the hills. I never bought into it. That is, until that summer. I was doing an internship at the county office, which kept me too exhausted to join the games for a few weeks. One night, my cousins came home shaken, telling me their friends had seen a white figure floating across the field, moving toward them without touching the ground. They'd all run screaming. I laughed it off, chalking it up to overactive imaginations. Once my internship ended, I rejoined the team. I was the captain, after all. One evening, we were playing late, and our volleyball ran out of air. My cousins went to borrow a pump from a neighbor 5 blocks away, but I stayed behind to finish some homework. By the time we wrapped up, it was past 10 at night, and it was my turn to return the pump. The path to the neighbor's house was a dark stretch of road with no streetlights, just the moon to guide me. As I walked back alone, something caught my eye, a white shape in the middle of the road. I froze, my heart racing. It was a figure floating just above the ground, draped in a long, flowing dress that rippled as if caught in a breeze, though the air was still. Its presence pulled at me like it demanded I look. I wanted to run, but my legs felt heavy, my eyes locked on it. I finally broke free and sprinted home, my breath ragged. That night we all heard it, thuds echoing from the field, like someone was bouncing a ball over and over. But when we looked, the field was empty, bathed in moonlight. A neighbor later told us she'd heard soft cries coming from the same spot. I don't know what I saw that night, but it wasn't human. And those sounds in the field, they weren't just in our heads. Something lingers out there, and I'll never walk that road alone again. You can call me Claude, and I live in the backwoods of northern Louisiana. This story I'm about to tell you comes from an old friend of my father's, a seasoned fisherman named Jerome, who used to share the strangest tales with us around the campfire. Jerome was the kind of man who lived for those pre-dawn hours on the water. He'd been fishing the Wachita River since he was knee-high to a grasshopper, and that old river held more secrets than a politician's diary. The locals had all sorts of stories about that stretch of water, tales of river spirits, hidden caves along the banks, and some fishermen swore that during certain hours of the night, the water would go completely silent. Not a ripple, not a whisper, just an unnatural stillness that made your skin crawl. Jerome told us 2 stories that still give me goosebumps. The time he encountered the river guardian, and his discovery of the miracle moss oil. Now, Jerome wasn't one to believe every tall tale that came down the pike, but he was absolutely convinced that something ancient protected that river. He'd seen it with his own eyes. He claimed, a small, dark creature that would leap from stone to stone, terrorizing the more superstitious fishermen, and even trying to capsize the boats of inexperienced anglers. Most of the old-timers had given up fishing what they called Devil's Bend, a particularly treacherous section where the current ran fast and the rocks jutted up like broken teeth. But Jerome, despite his fear, kept going back. See, those pre-dawn hours were when the fish bit best, and with fewer competitors brave enough to fish at night, he was making good money selling his catch at the local market. For protection, Jerome started carrying his grandfather's old Colt revolver, just in case that creature decided to try flipping his boat like it had done to others. One foggy morning, around 3 a.m., Jerome was out there alone when he heard splashing sounds, like something emerging from the depths. He grabbed his flashlight and swept it across the rocky outcropping. And there, it was a small, fur-covered being with eyes that glowed like hot coals, staring right at him. The thing bounded across the water a few more times before vanishing into the darkness. Suddenly, Jerome felt his boat rocking violently. Before he could react, he was thrown into the cold river water. Desperate and disoriented, he swam toward the rocks where he'd just seen the creature and hauled himself up, watching helplessly as his boat disappeared downstream in the current. Jerome was a strong swimmer, but something told him not to get back in that water. He stayed on those rocks, praying and shivering until sunrise, waiting for another fisherman to come by and help him get to shore. The fear of that creature dragging him under kept him frozen in place. That encounter taught Jerome a harsh lesson about greed. His desire to fish where others feared to go had nearly cost him his life. For months afterward, he couldn't bring himself to go near the water. Even during daylight hours, the thought of that thing waiting for him kept him on dry land. As the months passed, Jerome's financial situation grew desperate. Fishing was his livelihood, and without it, he was struggling to put food on the table and keep the lights on. That's when fate intervened in the strangest way. One afternoon, while walking through the French Quarter of New Orleans on a supply run, Jerome encountered an elderly Creole woman sitting at a small table with tarot cards spread before her. She called out to him, insisting she read his palm. Something about her weathered face and knowing eyes compelled him to stop. "Child," she said, studying the lines on his palm, "you're walking through dark times, but your luck's about to change. First, though, you got to face down what's been haunting you." Jerome's blood ran cold. This woman couldn't possibly know about his encounter on the river, yet her words felt like they were meant specifically for him. He found himself telling her everything: the creature, the overturned boat, his fear of returning to the water. The old woman nodded knowingly. "That river's got old spirits, older than the cypress trees, but I can help you." She reached into a worn velvet bag and pulled out a small glass vial filled with dark, aromatic oil. "This here's Spanish moss oil, blessed under 13 full moons. You anoint your boat, your gear, and yourself before you go out on that water. But remember, never fish alone at night again. That river's got its moods." The oil cost Jerome nearly his last $100, money he couldn't afford to spend. But something in the woman's eyes convinced him to take the gamble. "Listen carefully, child," she said as she handed him the vial. "This river at night holds dangers you can't imagine, but Spanish moss oil brings luck, prosperity, and protection to those who respect the water." Jerome did exactly as the woman instructed. He blessed his new boat, his nets, his fishing rods, everything touched by that oil. And from that day forward, his luck changed dramatically. Every time Jerome cast his net into the river, it came back heavy with fish. Bass, catfish, crappie, more than he could fit in his coolers. For 18 months, Jerome enjoyed prosperity like he'd never known. He bought a new house, traded in his beat-up pickup for a reliable truck, and his daughter even landed a good job at the local hospital. Life seemed perfect. Then one day, the oil ran out. Jerome searched everywhere: herb shops in New Orleans, root doctors in the bayou, spiritual advisors throughout Louisiana. Nobody had ever heard of Spanish moss oil blessed under 13 full moons. Some even laughed at him, pointing out that Spanish moss doesn't produce oil. Without his protective charm, Jerome lost the courage to return to the water. Today, he lives comfortably on his savings and a small pension. But the truth is, the more you have, the more you want. He still searches for someone who might have that miraculous Spanish moss oil. I don't know if any of this is true, or if it's just another fisherman's tale. But I do know that some stories stick with you, whether you believe them or not. And sometimes, late at night when the river runs silent, I wonder if Jerome's guardian is still out there, watching over those dark waters. You made it to the end of the stories. That means it's the perfect time to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you haven't already, leave a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great time relaxing, and good night.